Good evening and welcome to the Asheville City Council. I'm Esther Manheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to this March 9 meeting. I'm going to read a few things to you so I get all of this information out at the beginning of the meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually. We appreciate your patience as we work through holding these council meetings virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 7728. We are also broadcasting live on the city's YouTube channel, Charter Cable Channel 193, and on AT&T Uverse Channel 99. For those of you out there with us tonight, welcome. We'll take one short recess tonight, and council, please remind me, I think I forgot last time, sorry about that. For public comment, we ask callers to sign up in advance to join the live speaker queue. We will only be taking live comments from those who signed up prior to tonight's meeting. Those callers have been provided instructions on how to participate. Each caller is allotted 3 minutes to speak for each agenda item. We will hear live comments for up to 1 hour for each agenda item. A reminder to callers, you will first hear staff inform council that you're next to speak. Then you will hear an automated message letting you know you're unmuted and live in the meeting. You may begin speaking after the automated message. To best ensure staff can support you in the case of technical difficulties, we ask that you join the queue no later than the beginning of the agenda item before the agenda item on which you have signed up to speak. Additionally, if you have joined the speaker queue and need to disconnect before your time to speak, please hit *4 before hanging up. You can then call back using the same directions I just shared, and staff will enter you back in the speaker queue of your agenda item. I would like to ask all those participating in tonight's public comment to follow council's rules of decorum. The rules include the following. Speakers are only allowed to speak one time during the public comment period for each agenda item. A person may speak only if they have signed up to speak in accordance with the city's procedures. Speaker substitutions at the meeting are not allowed. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak on an agenda item. In general, each agenda item will have up to a total of 1 hour for public comment. A speaker may not share or relinquish any remaining time they have not used to another speaker. Speakers should not expect council members or city staff to comment on or respond to the speaker's comments during their 3 minutes. I will now go through and introduce all council members and staff leadership. Vice Mayor Smith.
Hello.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Hello.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Good evening.
Councilwoman Roney.
Good evening.
Councilwoman Turner.
Hello.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Hello.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Hello.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good evening, everyone.
And City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Hello.
Okay, we're gonna now stand, you can't see my flags, but they're in here, to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we do not have any proclamations on tonight's agenda, so I'll move to the consent agenda. Council, do I have any questions, comments, or a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
This is Sage. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Council, I see that we have one person signed up to speak on the motion to approve the consent agenda. Staff, do we have that speaker in the speaker queue?
Council, that caller is not in the speaker queue.
Okay. So I will do a roll call vote for the motion to approve the consent agenda. And again, we're trying to rotate these, so be ready. Councilwoman Turner,
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Smith,
Aye.
myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore,
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley,
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The consent agenda is adopted. Next, we have our presentations portion of the agenda. We have two presentations tonight. The first up is an update from the Economic Development Coalition for Asheville, Buncombe County. And Clark Duncan is here to present this item.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. Am I coming through loud and clear?
You are.
Thanks to you and members of council for this opportunity. I'm grateful to be with you tonight. And I also want to offer my special thanks to yourself and City Manager Deborah Campbell for your service as EDC board members, and to our longtime staff partners, Sam Powers and Nikki Reed, for your service and your partnership. For over a quarter century now, our city, county, and chamber have been stewards of the Economic Development Coalition, and our FY21 budget is featured here. Your guidance and investment have advanced our shared goals of growing economic opportunity for area residents. I'd add, with your support, the EDC remains one of only 62 economic development organizations in all of North America to have earned the accreditation of the International Economic Development Council. Next slide. So economic data informs and motivates the work of economic development and our strategic plan, and it's really a good place to ground our remarks tonight. You know, here at the urban center of Western North Carolina, we are fast approaching 500,000 residents, fueling a GDP of nearly $22 billion, with average wages that have grown some 30% over the course of the past decade. And yet, despite these gains, our poverty rate remains a stubborn 12%. Our average wages continue to lag those of our state and nation. And moreover, we know that disparity in educational and economic opportunity are among the greatest contributing factors to this concerning gap in relative income and cost of living. The pandemic has certainly laid bare the urgent economic challenges that will remain long after the return of public health. And those challenges are especially acute in our long under-resourced communities. So as regional leaders in the public and private sector, the disciplined work of responding to these challenges remains our common ground. Next slide. While our work is rooted in growing wages and jobs and capital investment in the tax base, we also know it's about a lot more. A better job leads to improved outcomes in safety and healthcare and education and upward mobility for the households supported by that job and for the neighborhoods supported by those families. These values define economic sustainability and guide our work in growing business that is good for people, that is good for place, and is good for prosperity. And these are the values we seek to promote through economic expansion. Next slide. So where do we begin? Our program of work is informed by best-in-class data to steer our limited budgetary resources for greatest impact. In short, we have to fish in the right ponds. And every 5 years, we evaluate high-value target industries by studying the growth of businesses, jobs, and wages in Asheville over the past 5 years, as well as specialization and competency of our workforce to support that job growth. On the next slide, you'll see that this exercise yields 5 key targets. Target industries that inform a marketing budget, everything from advanced manufacturing to office and technology employment. But there are a few key takeaways I'll point out on this very busy slide. Sorry for that. Locals, for example, are often surprised to learn that advanced manufacturing has grown by some 25% in these recent 5 years, and wages top most every other employment sector in our region. And in many of these jobs, we're up to 38 times more specialized than the average US community. Think about, for example, precision machining. Our goal of growing the climate technology sector a little bit further down is rooted in over a decade of collaboration with the National Center for Environmental Information, the Collider, and local leaders like Mac Pearsall and Jim Fox, seeking to catalyze private sector economic growth in fields related to climate adaptation and resilience. You'll notice we're also highly specialized in the talent and workforce demanded by the outdoor products industry, suggesting considerably more room for expansion for our local outdoor gear builders. So how do we cultivate growth in these key areas? The next slide. That exercise yields, the AVL 5x5 plan is that roadmap for us, advancing these 5 strategies over the next 5 years. And I'll briefly walk you through each strategy and recent outcomes. Strategy 1 begins at home with local industry, supporting workforce skills, enterprise sustainability, business development, and ultimately expansion and job creation here in our community. In the trailing 5 years to date, staff has supported these 10 Buncombe County industries as they announced over 1,000 new jobs and $250 million invested in new taxable buildings, technology, and equipment. These employers also represent our diverse strengths in life sciences and automotive, aerospace, technology, craft products, and yes, still craft beverage. 4 out of 10 of these are locally headquartered. On the next slide, over those same 5 years, these 4 new companies were recruited to town with commitments totaling another 1,060 jobs and nearly $750 million, representing global leaders in the field of bike components, HVAC equipment, circuit board manufacturing, and aircraft engine manufacturing. By recruiting complementary businesses, we're able to help advance urgent economic goals of this community. For example, securing long overdue state and federal roads infrastructure funding and Inca Commerce Park with the help of our Canadian friends, the manufacturer Hawkon. Or by advancing corporate leadership and economic mobility and workplace equity, like the aviation giant Pratt & Whitney, who funds the upfront cost of tuition, fees, and books for any employee seeking a degree. They were recognized recently by the Human Rights Campaign as a top place for our LGBTQ neighbors, and by the NAACP for a $25 million investment in their educational fund. These are the kind of private sector partners that we want investing in our future. On strategy 3, we'll recognize the power of growing our own through the programs of Venture Asheville, our commitment to grow the next generation of Asheville entrepreneurs and headquartered businesses. And over the past 5 years, we've supported the launch of over 100 startups, helped attract over $14 million in equity and angel funding to scale their businesses, and we've recruited and trained over 55 professional mentors in the elite MIT team mentoring service that we call Elevate. And 2 years ago, our team launched the Venture Asheville Microgrant Program. The next slide. This innovative program has granted $50,000 in privately raised funds on a competitive basis to early stage ideas and bootstrapping founders where it's most needed in our community, investing in those without the foundation of friends and family wealth that's most often required to take an idea from concept to market analysis to successful launch. To date, our grantees have included 40% women-owned businesses and 20% Black-owned businesses. Strategy 4 focuses on building talent pipelines that create pathways to high-wage careers for our high school, our regional college students, as well as adult job seekers, with specific strategies to lift those living in under-resourced communities of color. And I want to share 2 quick programs starting with Next AVL. For 13 summers now, For 13 summers now, I've actually personally hosted high school interns from the City of Asheville Youth Leadership Academy, and proudly so. And in 2018, the EDC launched this college mentorship initiative, largely modeled on the national and recognized success of CALA. In partnership with UNC Asheville, Western Carolina, and Warren Wilson, The EDC recruits college students for a structured 9-month mentorship program that pairs students of color, students from immigrant communities, or first in family to attend college with a trained local mentor. And our goal is simple: a talent retention strategy, investing in a more diverse future workforce, better rooting them in our economy as a place where they can see themselves and launch a career and succeed. The next program I'd like to update you on this evening is, there they go, one more slide, is the Inclusive Hiring Partners Program, with goals to increase workforce participation and job retention for under-resourced populations who've been socially or economically disconnected from generational prosperity. The partners featured here on this slide, including our grant partners at the City Housing Authority, drive the collaborative success of this model, connecting people and families facing employment barriers with career opportunities in high-wage industries of healthcare, construction, and manufacturing. And through relationships with our community partners, each participant—
Maggie, I think we'll let Clark finish.
I'll wrap it up, guys.
Clark is giving you the gong.
Got it. Is there a hook? Through our relationships with community partners, each participant's matched with a peer support specialist. On the next slide, I would share we've recruited over 17 employment partners, and our program funds best-in-class DEI training from the Lenore Ryan Equity and Diversity Institute for all frontline supervisors, creating a better informed and supported interview process and place of work for our job seekers. My thanks to council and the city, as well as each of these purpose-driven businesses for participating with us. Strategy 5, I'll wrap it up, is really looking at the capacity of our sense of place, right, to accommodate our economic development goals. And with supportive funding from Buncombe County, last summer, we launched this 5th strategy, which is a county-wide lands analysis that will align needs of business, our residents, and our government partners to bring new sites and buildings to market, very simply to accommodate the ambitious goals for a more diversified employment base and opportunities for our residents. So with that, Madam Mayor, I will conclude. Apologies for running over our timer. And my really great gratitude to members of council for your many years of support and the opportunity to work with you for the next 5 years.
Council, does anyone have any questions for Clark?
Do you have any strategies that will support citizens who may be returning from the criminal justice system?
We work closely with Philip Cooper and the YMI Center as partners in the inclusive hiring program. So I think the targeted populations that we're working with in the IHP program really include residents in Asheville Public Housing, those re-entering from justice involvement or re-entering the workforce from addiction. Those are kind of the 3 primary buckets.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Clark, I think, one question we hear, or one comment we hear as a city council, folks will say, why does the city spend money on recruiting the tourism industry to Asheville? And that's sort of a complex comment because, of course, the city's work to recruit and grow employers in Asheville is done through the Economic Development Commission in collaboration with Buncombe County and the state and other partners.
Right.
But, talk a little bit about the threshold requirements for any kind of employer to qualify for incentives through the EDC.
Thank you, and that's a great point of clarification. Our goals as a coalition, our city, county, and chamber, are really focused on wage growth by targeted investment in industries that will help us raise the overall standards of living in our community. And that I walked you through sort of that spectrum there. To qualify for incentive support either from our city or our county, there are a couple bars to chin, and they're related to capital investment of typically at least a couple of $1 million, and wages that at a minimum exceed the average wage of Buncombe County, which is today about $43,500. And there's some unique opportunities within those incentive policies to also incentivize certain kinds of hiring behaviors. And we're seeing that reflected in some changes we're making in the county incentive policy. So typically it's tied to capital investment, to wage, and to the number of jobs.
Okay, and I'm not trying to make a judgment call here on one industry versus another, but it's a common comment we hear. And of course, a lot of people are employed in the tourism economy that exists in Asheville. But as you highlight, we have a lot of other robust sectors, and that's where the focus is, and the and a lot of what drives that is the payment, the job pay, and the investment level. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Clark, this is Kim. Thank you for your presentation. Can you speak to some of the barriers of meeting the goals that you've set?
That's a great question. I think our barriers in terms of quality job growth are going to be tied, one, to investing in the resiliency of our workforce. I think we face a very different environment in terms of one where I launched my career, right? I think our rising generation will need to reinvest in themselves and their skills every 5 to 10 years for continuity of their career. And so I think investing in partners, not only at the earliest stages of our public schools, but in AB Tech specifically, that I'm particularly proud to partner with, is going to be key for future success. And I realize I rushed through our site strategy, but I would say our businesses are facing the same challenges that our residents are in terms of being priced out of appropriate physical infrastructure where they can live. And if we want to champion the kinds of growth that I think we all do in terms of jobs, then I'm hoping we can think more strategically about where do we want those next corridors of growth. And I know we've worked for years with the city on thinking very strategically about what we want our river district to be in terms of commerce and residents and arts and culture. And I think we need to have that conversation broadly across the city and across the county. So we're laying the foundation for the kind of economy we want the next generation to have access to.
Thank you. So given the impact of the action around House Bill 2, do you anticipate that a non-discrimination ordinance would have a welcoming impact on potential development or job creation?
I think for sure, devil's in the details, but I will tell you, when we were dealing with HB2, however many years ago now, it was a real and significant challenge to economic expansion. We lost very real opportunities at hand, and here in Asheville specifically. So I think the more welcoming and hospitable an environment we can create for all residents and all businesses, I think, yeah, that's a pathway to success, particularly for the kind of businesses that want to invest in our community.
Thank you so much.
Clark, this is Sage. Thank you for your presentation. I want to try and ask you a more detailed question. When you're recruiting these companies to potentially relocate here, do you hear that housing, lack thereof, or housing costs is, in fact, an issue they consider?
Sure. Yeah, we look, we provide housing data on a regular basis. And I think that to Councilwoman Roney's question is also a real constraint or potential constraint on continued growth. Because we want to create opportunities at all rungs of the economic ladder, right? With the idea that an entry-level job can progress to the next job. So that requires housing at all rungs of the economic ladder. And our inability to create that, to offer the same housing environment as our competitive communities across the Southeast or across the globe is a concern.
Thank you so much.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise, we're going to thank Clark for the presentation.
Thank you all. It's great to be with you.
Thanks. Okay, we have one other presentation tonight, and that is the manager's report. And so I will turn it over to Deborah Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everyone. If we could bring the presentation up, Ashley. You can go to the next slide, please. So this evening, first one, can you go back, please? The presentation is going to be hopefully relatively brief. We only have 2 items that we want to present to you this evening as part of the manager's presentation. First, I'd like to just share with you some incredible things that our employees are doing, and I'm just calling this employee recognitions, and also to welcome a few new employees that have joined our team. The bulk of the presentation, though, will be around an important report, and this will obviously just be a summary of the report. Patricia will provide for you more detailed source for this information if you want to read the entire report. But we were asked to do an assessment of the work of our Equity and Inclusion Department. And so Patricia Rosenberg, who serves as our city auditor, will be providing you with a relatively detailed presentation on that department's or Office of Equity and Inclusion's work. Now, next slide. So starting out with employee recognitions, there's a saying sometimes that sometimes public employees only do their job. Well, this particular public employee, a City of Asheville Water Department employee, Anthony Buzz Brown, he saw an individual on I-40 bridge. There had been a call to APD about potentially a suicidal subject that was on the bridge. Well, Anthony took the time while he was driving. He noticed the man on the bridge and he stopped to help. By the time that APD arrived, Anthony had gotten the man away from the bridge and to the back of his car. When Officer Vincent Guerrero sent in information about what had happened, he suggested that Anthony needed some type of recognition. His quote specifically was, "Anthony tried to leave and not make a big deal of this, but I had to get his name because I'm confident without Anthony stopping and talking with the man, he may have possibly jumped before officers arrived on scene. Anthony very well saved a life today and should be recognized for his actions." And so if you all don't mind, if we could recognize Mr. Anthony Buzz Brown for the remarkable intervention that he made. Next slide, please. Also, this is a very large team of people. There was a call that was made to APD that there was a gun that had been discharged off Sand Hill Road in West Asheville. This particular incident lasted over 7 hours. No one was injured during the incident, and the response required a substantial amount of police resources patrol officers, emergency response team, crisis negotiation team, public information officer, patrol captain, detectives, criminal investigations captains. So it took a village, but we are so pleased that this event happened without incident, and that the person is safe. Everyone around that area was safe, and that our officers were able to address this issue and go home safely as well. So to our APD officers, thank you very much. Next slide, please. I also wanted to recognize and welcome back Engine 11 crew. You all may have recalled that there was a pretty serious accident in January where the fire truck actually turned over. And I wanted to just say, welcome back. They came back, I believe yesterday, to work. Captain Angie Bell, Engineer Ricky Hessen, Senior Firefighter Lane Thomas, Senior Firefighter Jonathan Hefflinger. So we are so, so happy to have them back at work. So welcome back. Next slide, please. I'd also like to, and I don't normally do this for a lot of new employees, because luckily we do have lots of new employees coming to our organization, but I'm highlighting these two of three because of their relationship to our reimagining public safety and how a reallocation of resources from the Asheville Police Department enabled us to create these positions for these new employees. So Jeremy Lett, he steps in to his new role as Asheville Neighborhood Services Specialist. He will be working with our Communications and Public Engagement Division, be working with Brenda Mills, and our two new persons in our newly created Office of Data and Performance, Cameron Henshaw and Natalie Bailey. So welcome to our new employees. Next slide, please. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Patricia, who is going to give you an update on the equity and inclusion assessment, and appreciate Patricia being here to present this information. Patricia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Rosenberg, and I'm the internal auditor, talking about the equity and inclusion assessment that I have been doing since last summer, and the report that was recently issued.
I think Patricia's audio is way low.
Yeah, it is low. I was going to say something.
Take him out. Okay, is the sound better now?
It does. Just speak louder.
Okay. So my name is Patricia Rosenberg. I'm the internal auditor for the city, and I have been responsible for an assessment of our Office of Equity and Inclusion and the Equity and Inclusion works that have been happening around the city. So the key takeaways that I would like for everyone to get from this presentation and from the report that was also issued in conjunction with that today. There's been a substantial amount of work around equity and inclusion, and that work has spanned across every city department. I will say when I started this assessment, I expected to produce a report that was about 10 pages. And as y'all can see, it ended up being 32. So there's more work than I think a lot of us realized. And that's something that the city should be really proud of. And second takeaway is that our equity and inclusion goal setting has been a collaborative effort that's also included all city departments. One of the first initiatives that the Office of Equity and Inclusion took on was building equity core teams. And they use the core teams for capacity building and to serve as equity and ambassadors back to city departments. And the first equity core team created the Equity Action Plan, which you'll be hearing a lot about tonight. And the second equity core team created the equity budget tool. Third takeaway is that the city has tools that are effective in incorporating equity into decision-making. So some of those tools that you hear about are our racial equity toolkit. And that toolkit has really changed how city implements new initiatives. And I want to emphasize really the effort that it takes. The entire racial equity toolkit is part of is included in the appendix of this report. And if you look through it, you can see that it is not something that employees work through in an afternoon. It takes tremendous time and space to successfully implement the racial equity toolkit. But for the initiatives that have used it, employees are reporting back saying that it is incredibly effective in implementing change. A second tool that the city has is the equity budget tool, and that was created by the Equity Core Team 2. It isn't fully implemented yet, but we are working towards that. And I know y'all heard earlier this afternoon from the budget work session, a lot of the work that is happening around incorporating an equity lens into the entire budget process. And so this will be, the equity budget tool is the next step in that process. We have the Equity Action Plan, which is really a blueprint for the work of the Office of Equity and Inclusion. We have lots of training that's happening that's been driven by the Office of Equity and Inclusion. And there's also training that's happening through our HR department that's helping employees get educated and learn how to better implement equity and inclusion in everyday work. And the last major tool the city's been using is GIS mapping, and I will talk more about that later in this presentation. But it's been a really effective tool in implementing the initiatives that have geographic impacts in the city. And then the last takeaway is that the city needs to continue building capacity through training and practice. So again, using an equity lens takes time and space, and employees need to be able to learn more about how to implement it in their daily work and practice that. Next slide. So an overview of the presentation this evening, I'm going to go through the process that I undertook for the equity assessment and give a background on the Office of Equity and Inclusion. Then I'm going to go through an internal assessment, and that's using the basis of the Equity Action Plan, and it'll provide progress on equity and inclusion initiatives across the department, or across all the departments. And then lastly, I want to identify areas for improvement and give recommendations for next steps. Next slide. So the first step in this equity assessment process was to identify why this assessment was necessary. And really it was to address council and community requests, including the requests through the Black Asheville demands. The assessment is here to provide transparency around the equity and inclusion work at the city. And it's also to identify areas for improvement and plan next steps. In this process, I started by doing, and throughout the assessment, conducted numerous in-depth interviews with the Office of Equity and Inclusion employees. And I want to stress that that really includes all employees, including the ones who are no longer with the city. Those interviews were conducted collaboratively with the entire Office of Equity and Inclusion and individually with each employee. Separately from the Office of Equity and Inclusion, I interviewed an additional 42 city employees about equity initiatives, and several of those employees were interviewed multiple times for different initiatives. There was also collected and analyzed data and information to support the information that came from the interviews, and also to report out it throughout the report, anything that we could support that shows support for the equity and inclusion work. This involved a close review of our equity action plan to determine how the department equity initiatives that I've learned about through the interviews align with the action plan goals. Next slide. So a little background on the Office of Equity and Inclusion. The creation began in 2016 with City Council's vision of 2036. The Office of Equity and Inclusion was really to support the goal of a diverse and inclusive community. And their mission is to use a racial equity lens to review and achieve the city's strategic goals in health, education, housing, and economic mobility. The council adopted the 2017 fiscal year budget to include the hiring of an equity and inclusion manager. She was hired in July 2017. And at the same time, council appointed members to a 3-month task force, which was the Blue Ribbon Committee. The major recommendation that came from the Blue Ribbon Committee created the the Human Relations Commission. And another major recommendation was that the city expand the Office of Equity and Inclusion to hire 3 additional employees. That recommendation was accepted, and all 3 employees were hired in fiscal year 2019. The first key initiative that came out of the Office of Equity and Inclusion was to assemble a team of employees to map out a plan for the city's initiatives and advancing equity and inclusion. That plan became the Equity Action Plan, and the Equity Action Plan is the guiding document for the Office of Equity and Inclusion. The Equity Action Plan was presented to and adopted by City Council in June of 2018. And because the Equity Action Plan has been adopted by the city and serves as the guiding document for the Office of Equity and Inclusion, it's what serves as the basis for this assessment. Next slide. So if you follow along the Equity Action Plan, it has 6 major objectives. And I'm going to go through and pull some highlights of accomplishments that the city has achieved in each of those objectives. So the first objective centers around workforce equity. And there are a lot of department initiatives around improving workforce diversity through recruitment efforts. So some of those recruitment efforts include better outreach and advertising of available positions, specifically to target BIPOC candidates. And then as positions become available, we're looking closely at the job descriptions, and they're being written looking at minimum requirements, and then also to make sure that our job descriptions are including more inclusive language. And then as we work through our recruitment efforts, we're also using our employee demographic data to help track the effectiveness of these initiatives. When the Equity Action Plan was adopted, there was no initial baseline data, and our HR department worked through how our demographic information is managed, and made it more consistent. It took 2 years to clean all of our data trackers to have information to report. So there was no baseline data at the beginning of our Equity Action Plan. We have a starting point as of fiscal year 2020. And the last major initiative out of the workforce equity is around our implicit bias training. And the Office of Equity and Inclusion is working with the HR department to offer implicit bias training to all employees, but it's also working to make it mandatory for all hiring managers in particular. Next slide. The next objective is around contracting and procurement equity. The city recently adopted the business inclusion policy, and I'm sure that's something y'all are all familiar with. In order to launch the business inclusion policy, this really was a collaborative effort across many city departments. And it's changed the city's contracting and procurement from a race and gender neutral perspective to race and gender conscious. The city has tremendous spending power, and this policy helps align equity goals with how the city does business with local contractors. The second initiative in the contracting and procurement equity is around our vendor self-service, which was launched at the same time as our business inclusion policy. And it will help the city track minority and women-owned businesses for contracting outreach. The vendor self-service allows vendors to input their own information, and it helps the city identify businesses that are interested in working with the city. So instead of individual employees having knowledge of vendors who provide certain types of services, this is in one central database that any city employee can access. Next slide. The third objective is around the knowledge and tools used by city staff. And our Office of Equity and Inclusion offers a variety of training sessions. The training sessions are based on expressed needs and things happening in the country and the community. And they provide an environment for employees and for boards and commissions members to be educated and to explore. Using an equity lens takes practice. And so our training sessions give employees the opportunity to do that so that they learn how to take the equity lens and apply it to their everyday work. The second initiative is around our interdepartmental action teams. Those were created and they assemble key decision makers in the city to collaborate on goals in the equity action plan. So for example, we have an interdepartmental action team on contracting and procurement. So it takes the key decision makers in the city who work in contracting and procurement and make sure that they're all working towards the same goals in the equity action plan. Next slide, please. The next objective is around community outreach and public engagement. For accessibility to public meetings, the city has recently done a survey, and one of the things that came out of that survey was that low-income citizens often have barriers that prevented access to public meetings. Those barriers are things like transportation, childcare, and the timing of public meetings. And so the city launched an initiative to allow remote viewing through a platform we call Public Input, helps eliminate those barriers. It might surprise some people to know that the remote access for public meetings was in the works before the COVID-19 pandemic, although it certainly expedited the process. That said, when this pandemic and when we're able to have mass gatherings, you can expect the city to continue to use public input and have remote access. So this is something that probably will not disappear for the city. And then another form of outreach and public engagement is through the city's boards and commissions. And the city has recently started collecting and reporting data about boards and commissions demographics. And we're working to better attract a more diverse representation on our boards and commissions. And part of that is through changing how we advertise openings on boards and commissions, for example. Next slide, please. The next objective in the Equity Action Plan is centered around using racial equity best practices criteria. And there are two major tools that I've already mentioned earlier. So the first one is the Equity Budget Tool. And again, that was created by our Equity Core Team too. So that was created by city employees. And it's a set of questions that are designed to incorporate equity into the entire budget process. If you're interested in seeing more on the Equity Budget Tool, that is one of the appendices in this report. And then the second major tool is our Racial Equity Toolkit. And that was designed by the Government Alliance on Racial and Equity, which is known as GARE. And it's really, it's a set of questions that are, it's to help incorporate equity into decision-making. And again, the Racial Equity Toolkit is incredibly effective in incorporating equity, but it is something that needs a lot of time and space. For employees that have worked through our Racial Equity Toolkit, it's a several month-long process. And so it's just something to keep in mind that as we try to use more and more initiatives, as we encourage employees to use the Racial Equity Toolkit, we need to make sure that we're giving them the space to be able to do that effectively. And then some of the specific initiatives that I want to point out, one is the noise ordinance, and that the noise ordinance used the Racial Equity Toolkit, and it went before it worked through the toolkit. There started as a city recommendation of criminalizing noise, and then after it worked through the toolkit, it's become a recommendation to a noise program that offers community-based solutions and a good neighbor policy to improve communication. We're moving the noise ordinance from the police department to the development services department. And our development services department used the Racial Equity Toolkit for these recommendations. Another initiative was launched in the Parks and Recreation Department, and they use an investments matrix that tracks how Parks and Recreation budget is being spent throughout the city. The matrix was designed to use census information, and it gives parks and recreation center locations weighted ratings to make sure spending, improvements, and upgrades are being distributed equitably. And this has an added bonus of when citizens have questions around improvements in parks and rec center locations, the city is able to respond with a list of priorities and where a certain request is on the list of priorities and why. And then the last initiative that I want to point out is our GIS mapping of racial equity. And this is our ITS department used geographic information system technology to map racial equity in Asheville. And I really want to call attention to this. It won the 2019 North Carolina G. Herbert Stout Award for visionary use of GIS. The mapping of racial equity is a cutting edge initiative. And after the city of Asheville launched this, it is now being mimicked across the country. And our ITS department employees have presented this mapping both locally, regionally, and nationally. So that's something that I think the city really should be proud of. And then the racial equity GIS mapping is being used to assist geographic-based city initiatives. And that's such as streets repaving, neighborhood sidewalks prioritization, and the city's climate justice initiative are all using or incorporating GIS mapping in their initiatives. Next slide, please. The last objective on the Equity Action Plan is around race-based disparities in our community and trying to decrease those. And some of the initiatives around that are our disposition policy on affordable housing. The disposition policy also used the city also used the racial equity toolkit to form this policy. And the toolkit really helped to identify the root causes of local housing disparities and to increase community outreach. It helped determine that the area median income requirement of 60% and below. And that really balanced between, and what was heard in using the racial equity toolkit from community members is what the city calls affordable is often not actually affordable to people of color. At the same time, the city struggles with the challenge of offering an area median income requirement that will attract developers to actually build housing units. And the other major thing that was incorporated in the disposition policy that came out of the racial equity toolkit was the requirement of accepting housing choice vouchers. Another initiative that was that's a partnership between the city and Buncombe County is our Safety and Justice Challenge. This is a national initiative to reduce over-incarceration by changing the way America thinks about and uses jails. The county received an initial grant of $1.75 million, and they just announced last month that they received an additional award of $1.7 million. So at this point, the Safety and Justice Challenge has received a total of over $3.5 million, and the city continues to help support those efforts. And then the last initiative I want to highlight tonight is the city's racial healing mini grants. And this was done in coordination with the Office of Equity Inclusion. They received the North Carolina Innovation and Implementation Grant from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity to help fund this city initiative. At this point, the city has awarded 2 rounds of these grants. Each round has been $40,000 total, and it provides financial support to community members and groups who are already working towards racial healing, and it helps build a more trusting relationship between city government and those who have been disenfranchised and underinvested by local government. Next slide. Now I want to go into probably some pretty significant detail on the recommendations to come out of this assessment. The first major recommendation is to develop an updated equity action plan. As I walk through the objectives tonight, and as you can see in more detail in the report, the city has implemented many of the original initiatives in the equity action plan, and now the city needs to outline next steps. And I think for the Office of Equity Inclusion is already in development of a new equity action plan. They need to make sure that they utilize our Office of Data and Performance for measuring outcomes. That was something that was a challenge at the beginning of the equity action plan. I talked about that, especially around workforce equity, but it's really been echoed throughout the objectives in the action plan of getting baseline data. Now that we have achieved some baseline data, we need to start measuring better outcomes. And then being able to prioritize short, medium, and long-term goals in the equity action plan. The next recommendation is to formally incorporate equity inclusion in the entire budget process. And I know early today at the budget work session, you heard about the city is using equity as a central lens for budget discussions this year. So the next step in this is to have council formally incorporate equity as well. And since city council is ultimately responsible for budget decisions, this recommendation in particular is intended to build accountability through the entire budget process, and that includes at the council level. And that involves a level of trust between the work that city staff is doing to incorporate the equity lens into the budget process and making sure that that's carried up to the council level. The third recommendation is to conduct centralized collaborative community outreach. The city has also already begun this effort. And really the goal around this recommendation is trying to avoid community fatigue as the city incorporates the racial equity toolkit into more decision-making. There's an increased need for community input. So instead of continually asking about individual initiatives, it makes sense to conduct one big collaborative community outreach and have a database of needs and wants in the community. The fourth recommendation is to build equity work into employee job responsibilities. And this really centers around adjusting workloads to incorporate equity inclusion. Throughout this assessment, something that I heard repeatedly, so for employees who served on equity core teams, employees who serve on interdepartmental action teams, employees who have worked through the racial equity toolkit, incorporating the equity lens into current projects, programs, and initiatives, all of these things take time and space, and we need to give employees the opportunity to do that instead of adding it to an already full workload. And the city is still working on how to operationalize this. And then the last recommendation to come out of this assessment is to include equity inclusion in all department work plans. And this is really to make sure that departments are incorporating equity and inclusion in all of the city's programs and initiatives. And this is another recommendation that that still needs to be operationalized. And I will say specifically around work plans, in fiscal year 20, each individual department put together a work plan, and most departments had elements of equity inclusion in them. This recommendation started to make sure that all departments are incorporating that into their work plans. At this point in this year, work plans have shifted to become one central document. And that's really to help collaboration amongst departments. So because it is one central document, it is more summarized. So it's easier, it's more difficult to call out the specific elements of equity inclusion, but it's something that every department needs to make sure that they're incorporating in their work plans. Next slide. All right, that's everything I have at this point. Are there any questions from everyone?
Before we, Mayor, if I could, before we take questions, I hope that you saw and see that there is a lot of work going on around equity and inclusion, but I want to name some people who are principally responsible for this. And a lot of these people are not here any longer. Kimberly Archie, who's a former manager of equity and inclusion, Nia Davis, Paulina Mendez, and Yashika Smith. I just wanted to make sure that we named principally who was leading or who has led these initiatives. And I want to also commit specifically to these individuals, to this organization, and to this community, that we are committed to continuing the incredible work that has gone on, particularly led by these employees. I also want to thank Richard White, who is the interim manager right now of equity and inclusion, but his real job is an assistant city manager, and he's doing dual roles. So thank you all, staff, for all that you've done and the distance that you have brought us thus far. And we know that we've got a long way to go, but I think we're making progress. I'll stop there. Thank you.
There's hands up, and I didn't see who was up first, but Kim, you have some questions?
I do. At first, I want to say thank you to Patricia. Our organization is so lucky to have your skilled and careful eye when we need to review important details. So thank you so much for your presentation and for your audit work. So Deborah, we have so many important decisions happening right now. They always say like, this is the year that like, everything changes. It feels like this is like a really important time, especially when we're talking about reparations, about zoning changes. Can you speak to ways that you have worked with the Office of Equity and Inclusion as it began to dissipate and as we anticipate the loss of even another staff and a department that is depleted by 75%?
Let me see if I understand your question. How have I personally worked with them? Most of my work is actually individually. I have met with each one of those staff members individually and collectively. And in fact, when Kimberly first left, I had a meeting to again reassure them that we supported them, that we were assigning support from Richard White from the city manager's office to continue supporting them. A lot of my individual one-on-one meetings were, what do you need? Is there something that you need from me individually and personally as support for your work? But when I first met with them, I actually, the first meeting was more, let me get to know you. I don't, we're distant. I'm at a level and I just had not had the opportunity to work with them. So our first meeting was just getting to know one another better.
Thank you. I had a insightful conversation that was meant to be just about multimodal transportation with Maggie Ullman, who's a new advisor on our Multimodal Transportation Commission. And from that conversation, I took two ideas that I think we might be able to look at and kind of operationalizing an equity lens. And it's just a small change, but whenever we're making decisions that include a staff report, staff reports normally include like pros and cons, the fiscal impact. And I think in order to look at where we could pause potential harm being done and also move in a more positive, proactive direction, we could maybe just include an equity impact and a sustainability impact and start to like think about those in every decision that we make. And it would help us to be able to see if there are recommendations. I know sometimes there won't be, but if we could just formalize starting to look at those.
And yeah, we try to, Ms. Ronnie, we try to include that lens even when we're doing pros and cons, even though it may not specifically say equity analysis or impact or sustainability impact, but sure, that's something we can look at.
And maybe we can talk about it at our retreat too.
Yeah,
I'm just looking for ways for us to help meet our goals and to weave it into every conversation because it impacts all of us so much.
Absolutely.
Well, and this is, I would just point out, this is difficult because Deborah takes her direction from a majority of council. And so we have to have consensus around some of this direction while not micromanaging her management. I mean, she is hired as the city manager. She runs the day-to-day operations of the city. And we're a policy-making body. So I just want to try to remind everyone that we can't singly direct her to take action without having a consensus of council. And then we also have to be careful to stay within the boundary of the policy-making body that we are.
I appreciate that. So maybe I'll redirect that at my colleagues here and ask if we can look at that at our retreat as far as how we're operationalizing this work and supporting it throughout. I have brought this up before, and it feels like the right time to say that in this moment, I think we have an opportunity with the Office of Equity and Inclusion and this new audit that I think we need to address this department with the authority that matches the responsibility that we've assigned to it. And in order for our budget plans and policies to truly have that ongoing audit of what equity means, I think we could do something similar to what the county has done with addressing the charter to bring the Office of Equity and Inclusion to report directly to council. And I think it could be a really positive opportunity while we're in this moment of revisioning and hiring and all of that. So I hope that we can look at that together very soon.
Yeah, and I think that it may be,
Well, and
sorry, Mayor.
Deborah, I don't want you to feel obligated to have to respond to that, because I think Kim was directing and Councilwoman Roney was directing that at council in talking about changing our charter to make the Office of Equity and Inclusion report directly to council. I wasn't aware the county had an Office of Equity and Inclusion.
Sorry, I should clarify. What they did is, after some turmoil, changed the charter, to my understanding, to have their CFO report directly to the commission. So I left out that detail. Apologies. So because it became aware to me that you could have more than just your manager, attorney, and clerk report to the elected body, that we might want to consider something similar to that as well.
Okay, Sage, you had your hand up, but your hand went away. Do you have any other? Your hand's back up.
I don't. I got some weird glitch where I can't tell. So it's gray.
Okay,
So
okay, so you're not,
I
okay.
don't have a hand up. I'm so sorry.
Okay, and so Councilwoman Roney, were you concluded?
Yes, thank you for hearing me out. I am looking forward to having a deeper discussion at our retreat, because this is important. And we're, down 75% in this department, but saying that we're doing the work. So we're going to need help and experts. And we, have a great opportunity here to fill those seats. I'm looking forward to supporting Deborah in the ways that we can.
Okay, so anybody else have any questions or comments under this presentations portions? If not, we will move on to the next part of our agenda. Okay, the next part of our agenda is the public hearings portion of our agenda. Public hearing item A is the first public hearing to consider an amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance Articles 5, 8, 11, and 12 related to discretionary decisions in order to bring the city's development code into alignment with recent state legislation. And Principal Planner Shannon Tuck is here to present this item.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. So council members likely recall the previous code amendments related to 160D, but for folks who might be joining us new this evening, I'll just give a brief background introduction. What is 160D? 160D is a chapter in the North Carolina General Statutes that were adopted as part of a session law from 2019. And this law became effective last summer of 2020. It replaces the existing chapters of 160A, or largely replaces the existing chapters of 160A, which is the municipal chapter, and 153A, which is the county chapter in the North Carolina General Statutes. 160A and 153A are substantially similar. They have a lot of overlap. So one of the main goals of 160D was to consolidate those two chapters. And in the process, a collaborative group, including land use attorneys, the School of Government, and North Carolina legislators, also made a number of clarifications and reorganization of those laws. Next slide, please. So the timing of 160D, as I mentioned, it was the session law was 2019. It became effective in 2020, but we have until the summer of 2021 to actually make all of the changes to our code to be in alignment with 160D. And staff has been bringing forward a series of amendments for council's consideration that is updating our codes kind of in sections or based on topics. And we will have, this is the third in a series. We will have at least one more, possibly two, depending on how we decide to organize those remaining changes. Next slide. So tonight's amendment focuses on the topic of discretionary decisions. 160D clarifies that staff should not be making discretionary decisions, that this responsibility is to be performed by our elected and appointed officials. So as it relates to discretionary decisions, we basically have two options. The first is just to simply remove any authority that allows staff to make these sort of subjective or discretionary decisions. The other option is to develop clear and objective criteria where we can evaluate certain requests or certain conditions. And this amendment actually does a combination of both. So next slide, please. So a couple examples related to removing that discretionary language. Here's one related to permit validity. And you'll see the portion of the text that's struck out. It says that the Planning and Development Director may grant a single extension of this time period up to 6 months upon submittal by the applicant of sufficient justification. So here's an example where staff is being asked to make a discretionary decision about whether or not this is sufficient justification. So this is something that 160D is emphasizing that staff should not be doing. So if you had very specific criteria that you could consider, then that's a little bit different. Now, this is a particular topic where it might be difficult to develop that criteria, but the large majority of the sections where we're proposing to just remove the language is because it's if ever used, it's very rarely used, or it offers very little benefit. So in my 18, almost 19 years with the city, I think we've granted 2 extensions that I can recall. So this is something that is not needed very much. And rather than try to go through the difficult process of developing objective criteria, we just think it's really not necessary. We really don't need it. We'll just remove it. Next slide, please. Another example related to sidewalk standards. Again, that strike-through language, which is indicating that this is the language that we intend to remove. It says that sidewalks shall be 10 feet. I believe this came from the Downtown Development Code section. Shall be a minimum of 10 feet, but the city engineer may approve an alternative width based on context of the street and block where there is insufficient space. So again, here we're asking a city staff person to use their judgment to determine if there's insufficient space. Next slide. Now, I will say the large majority of the changes are, we propose to just remove this authority for discretionary decision-making. There are 3 instances where we propose to update or add new and objective criteria. So you recall the last example where we are proposing to remove the sidewalk or the ability for the city engineer to just grant relief to the sidewalk requirements and just at his discretion or her discretion. Here's where we propose to kind of offset that. So here we are saying under fee in lieu of construction, this is fee in lieu of construction of sidewalks, that here's a very specific objective criteria where we say essentially that if you have a building and you have a road and the only space in between, you know, this is the only space that you have for a sidewalk and that doesn't allow you to do the 10 feet, that you can pay a fee in lieu. So we're very specific. We say that you have to have, you're adaptively reusing an existing building or renovating an existing building. So you have an existing building face and you have existing transportation facilities and you just don't simply have the room. So here we have, in these conditions, we can grant relief and you don't have to do the 10-foot wide sidewalk, but you do have to pay a fee in lieu of the balance of the portion of the sidewalk that you're not constructing. We have some other instances where we have other criteria under which we can grant this kind of flexibility or where an individual can pay a fee instead of actually constructing the sidewalk. I want to emphasize that this is not new. We already have standards for fee in lieu of constructing sidewalks. We're proposing to update and clarify and remove anything that kind of suggests that staff has some authority to kind of subjectively or discretionarily determine whether or not these conditions apply. Next slide, please. Another example, we have a section of our code called Flexible Development Standards that allows staff to grant a little bit of administrative relief to development requirements. In this particular case, we're very specific. We say how much relief you get, 10% or 24 inches as it relates to setbacks, as in this example. And then we identify the conditions under which this might be warranted. So again, just trying to make it more objective. And again, these are existing standards that we're just trying to improve and make more clear and objective. Next slide, please. This third example is the only one where we're actually adding criteria to be used in evaluation. This is a little bit different because it's not about development standards. This one is actually about our land uses. And this has to do with our zoning districts. So we all know that the city has a number of different zoning districts where we determine what kind of land use activities can occur within. And we have just this large table that kind of identifies the most common land uses. And then it has all of the different zoning districts in it, and you can kind of follow the cells to determine whether or not it's permitted. Within each zoning district, it will refer to the table of uses. It will say permitted uses are those that are identified in the table. There's another sentence that says anything that's not listed is automatically prohibited. So in addition to needing to make changes related to 160D, there was also some fairly recent case law that clarified that you can't do it that way. You can't just outright prohibit something because most tables are not comprehensive. And ours is not. It's fairly typical of what you find in a lot of cities. So when you when you encounter a use that is not listed in your table, you have to go through a process of evaluating that use and determining what it is most similar to that already exists on your table. And these are the criteria that kind of came out of that legal decision that we're using to evaluate those new land uses that are not identified in our table. And those are the three areas where we are having the objective criteria. Again, I will just emphasize that the majority of the changes are just to remove the authority of staff to make any kind of discretionary decisions. There was a surprisingly large number of those changes. If you look through the draft ordinance, there's quite a few. But that concludes my summary. That's all I was going to cover in this introduction, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or go over any of those changes in more detail if the council would like.
Shannon, this is Gwen. It seems like a really big job to highlight all these areas where there was discretion and not fitting in. What happens if you didn't find them all?
Well, if we didn't find them all, then I think where we have that language that says that a particular staff person can do something, we just have to recognize that that is in conflict with 160D and that staff should not be exercising that authority. So, and in most instances, I think we would be safe in not, running any risk because it usually says in most of these instances, it says, the planning director or the city engineer may offer. So we don't have to exercise that authority, even if it's given to us lawfully. But in this particular case, it would be in conflict with 160D. So if we encounter those, we'll set them aside, identify them, flag them, and we will clean them up and remove them at a later date. Okay. It's possible because there were a lot. It did take quite a lot to go through the ordinance and try to identify all of those instances.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the state legislature, has put some penalties in if you don't do this. And I was just like, I assume that not just one person went through, that several people went through. So you tried to do I'm sure you did a comprehensive job. I was just wondering if there were penalties in the event that you didn't find everything, because it just seems like there was a lot.
Councilwoman Whistler, I may be able to add some additional context to that. The new 160D changes, as mentioned by Shannon, go into effect this summer. And at that point, essentially, if you have not made the changes, the state law controls, regardless of what your local ordinances may say. So if we did miss something, which I have full faith and confidence in the team putting all this together, that they've caught all of these. But if for some reason, if something was omitted, essentially the state law is going to control. We would assume that we wouldn't be exercising that discretion, and hopefully we would find it at some point and make it as a corrective change that would no longer hold any legal effect because it would be null at that point.
Thank you. Shannon, I'm sure you found everything. I mean, I didn't mean to insinuate you didn't.
There is a lot of text. So while I hope we did, we may find an instance here or there where we'll just have to kind of take care of it through a corrective amendment, like what we call a housekeeping amendment, just some typos and other corrections.
Well, thank you, Shannon, as a sage. I attempted to read the 88 pages and just don't know how you do it sometimes, but I know you already had a lot on your plate, so thanks for making this squeeze in somehow.
Any other questions for Ms. Tuck before we open up the public hearing? Okay, we have one person signed up under the public hearing. I will open the public hearing. Staff, do we have anyone in the caller queue?
Yes, we do have one caller on the line, Rob Thomas from South Asheville. Council, the caller has exited the call. That is all for this item.
Okay, thank you. I will close the public comment. Do I have a motion and second to recess the public hearing to consider an amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance Articles 5, 8, 11, and 12 related to discretionary decisions in order to bring the city's development code into alignment with recent state legislation until March 23rd, 2021?
So moved. Oh, I think that was Shanika. I'll second.
That wasn't Shanika. I think that was Sandra.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, Maggie, you got that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I will do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So next up is a public hearing to permanently, okay, so that's Ms. Tuck's leaving us. We're going to hear from Chad Bandy. This is a public hearing to permanently close an unopened right-of-way known as Trade Street. And Streets Division Manager Chad Bandy will present this item.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to present this. I do want to clarify before we start that if this one looks familiar, it should. It came before you a couple months ago. After the public hearing, we realized that the description of the closure that was presented to council was incorrect. So therefore, we needed to come back before council again with the corrected description and map of the closure. So with that said, the map before you is a portion of an unopened right-of-way known as Trade Street. This petition has been brought to us by Minch Construction and Benjamin Butler. Benjamin Butler joined that petition with Minch Construction. This one was presented to all departments through the TRC process with support. It did go in front of the Multimodal Commission on October 28th, which it was received unanimous support at that point. Staff is supportive of this closure, and at this point, we would ask for a resolution from council, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions before we open the public comment? Okay, we have one person signed up under public comment. I'll open the public comment. Staff, do we have anyone in the caller queue?
No, we do not.
Okay. We had one person signed up for all of these and apparently we're not going to hear from them. So I will close the public comment. So do I have a motion and second to recess the public hearing to permanently close an unopened right-of-way known as Trade Street until March 23rd, 2021?
This is Kim. Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Smith?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore?
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley?
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney?
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner?
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Next is a public hearing item C, a public hearing to consider adoption of 2021 limited obligation refunding bonds. Interim Finance Director Tony McDowell will present this item.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'll just briefly introduce the item and then turn it back over to you all for the public hearing. As a part of the city's ongoing capital improvement program, we issue typically two types of debt to fund that program, limited obligation and special obligation bonds. And typically we issue what's called bond anticipation notes as we get projects started. And essentially a bond anticipation note is a bank loan. And so on that initial bond anticipation note, we pay just interest. And then after we've spent a certain amount of money, we usually go back and do what's called the final takeout of that loan and begin paying both principal and interest on the debt. And that's what we're getting ready to do in April. We're going to go to the local government commission and issue that debt. But there's a couple of statutory steps we have to go through before we can go to the local government commission. One of those was you all did on February 23rd when you adopted some of the initial resolutions for those bonds, and you called for this public hearing tonight. So we'll hold the public hearing tonight, and then we'll turn to you all in a couple of weeks for final approval of the resolutions related to those bonds. So just a quick reminder, the debt that you all are going to be holding the public hearing on tonight has been used to fund a number of projects around the city over the last couple of years. In particular, the Tiger 6 construction in the River Arts District, we've used about $15.5 million to fund that. Also approximately $3 million to improve lighting at courts and fields in the Parks and Recreation Department, and about $1.3 million to replace some fire apparatus as well. And in addition, about $1.1 million for improvements along Charlotte Street. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to you all for the public hearing unless there are any questions.
Any questions? All right, I will open the public comment. We had one person sign up to speak under this, and my understanding is they are not in the queue. Just want to confirm that.
They are not in the queue.
Okay, so I'll close the public comment. Do I have a motion and second to recess the public hearing to consider adoption of 2021 limited obligation refunding bonds until March 23rd, 2021?
This is Gwen, so moved.
This is Sage. I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and I'll do a roll call vote. Myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore?
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley?
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney?
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner?
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler?
Aye.
And Vice Mayor Smith?
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to unfinished business. We have 4 items of unfinished business tonight. Unfinished. So again, just this is our COVID virtual meeting format where we have to have the public hearing and then we don't get to vote on the item until the next meeting. So then the next items are all items that we held the public hearing on at the last meeting. And so we don't take additional public comment tonight, but we do vote on them. So the first is a vote to permanently close a portion of an unopened right-of-way connecting east of Bellevue Road and west of Edgewood Road. Can I get a motion and a second to permanently close a portion of an unopened right-of-way connecting east of Bellevue Road and west of Edgewood Road?
So moved.
This is Gwen, second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second, and I'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Okay, we just got a couple more of these. The second is a vote to permanently close an unopened right-of-way connecting Biltmore Avenue directly south of White Fawn Drive. Can I get a motion and second to permanently close an unopened right-of-way connecting to Biltmore Avenue directly south of White Fawn Drive?
This is Gwen, aye. So moved.
This is Antoinette. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Myself, aye, and Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Okay. Next, unfinished business item C is a vote to consider the voluntary annexation of 0.47 acres off of Oak Hill Circle and Moorcrest Road. Can I get a motion and a second to consider the voluntary annexation of 0.47 acres off of Oak Hill Circle and Moorcrest Road?
This is Sage. I'll move.
This is Gwen, I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Unfinished business item D. This is our last item of unfinished business, and it is a vote to consider the initial zoning of 0.747 acres, which we just annexed, of property located off of Oak Hill Circle and Moorcrest Road to RM16 Residential Multifamily High Density District. Can I get a motion and a second to consider the initial zoning of, I don't know why it's consider the initial zoning, it's to zone 0.47 acres of property located off of Oak Hill Circle and Moorcrest Road to RM16 Residential Multifamily High Density District.
This is Sage. I'll move.
Okay,
I'll second.
all right, thank you. All right, roll call vote. Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
No.
We have an opportunity for a short break. Does anyone want a short break? Because our next item will take a long time. Yes, short break. Okay. It is 6:35. Let's return here at 6:45. Okay. All right. Welcome back from the break for City Council. We've now reached the new business portion of our agenda. What we're going to do tonight is talk about school board. So recently we adopted a legislative agenda for the City Council adopted a legislative agenda, and we did so unanimously. And what was not on that agenda was the issue of whether or not the council supports moving to an elected school board. Currently for Asheville City Schools, the school board is appointed by the City Council. And that is because of state legislation that requires us to do that. There are two school boards left in the state of North Carolina that are appointed. The rest are elected. So this issue has come up periodically in our community, and it has come up again recently. So I asked that this item be placed on the agenda for discussion. We do have a number of people that have signed up to speak on this item, but let me just say this in terms of the process for this evening. City council cannot make a binding decision about whether or not we move to an elected school board or not. It requires legislation. So we're only, if we take a vote on it tonight, our vote is just indicates our support for or against. And that will be useful to the legislative delegation in terms of their decision-making around moving ahead with introducing legislation to make any changes to the way the school board is selected. The legislature just went into session, and the bill filing deadlines are now. The legislature will likely adjourn before June because they too are also working on their budget, and that usually drives how long their session is. They will not then probably go back into session where they will consider legislation like this again until the short session, which would probably be April and May of next year. So from a timing standpoint, if this council were to support legislation that would move to an elected school board, we are in a bit of a time crunch. Otherwise, we would miss the 2022 election cycle. So just for some context, why now? Why can't we wait? How much time is there? There's just sort of, those are the moving parts. For consideration this evening are two options. And if anyone has any other suggestions about options, one is a hybrid option, which would move us to a elected and appointed school board. So some seats would be elected and some would be appointed. The other option would be to a fully elected school board. And I would ask that we vote on both options, simply because we're not completely sure that the hybrid model is legally allowed. It does not exist in North Carolina, so we're just not sure. And I personally have some concerns that if that's all we voted on and it went down to the legislature and the legislative staff for some reason thought it wasn't an option, we need to indicate to the legislative delegation where we fall on the other option, and that being the fully elected school board. So I guess what I'm just saying is give some options to the legislative delegation and let them know where we stand on these options. So the format for new business is that we do need a motion and a second for one of these options to get us started so that we can hear public comment. But I don't want to rush you. If you have something you would like to say, or if you're already ready for a motion, that would be fine too. So you tell me, but if and when you're ready for a motion, you might begin with the hybrid model. And then that would allow us to hear the public comment on the school board concept in general. Yes.
Madam Mayor, I have a question, if it's okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to sort of confirm what you said a minute ago. You said that there are only 2 school boards that are not elected in North Carolina. Was that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you said that we cannot change it without the legislation.
Right. The city council does not have the unilateral authority to change the format of the school board selection. We can only request legislation, and then the legislature has to actually pass that legislation.
Okay. So basically all the other boards that have been switched over actually went through legislation before moving to an elected. Is that what you're stating?
Yes, well, or they were established as elected school boards from the get-go, and they were never appointed. So, but they are all created by, as far as I understand, maybe Brad can weigh in here, by local legislation, or maybe the governing state statute that's broader. But.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of confused about. I just couldn't, yeah.
Well, before I muck it up anymore, let's ask our city attorney.
Mayor, I think you've mucked it up almost zero on this point. That's exactly right, Councilwoman Kilgore. The state statutes are set up to have a little bit of a different procedure for a city school board as opposed to a county school board. But although county school boards are actually required to be elected, city school boards are given the option to be appointed or elected. As the mayor said, we currently are down to only ourselves and one other small municipality in the state, which appoints our board members. So we are in the minority of that class now. All of the authority in order to have one or the other derives from the state legislation, which establishes the school board. And therefore, only the state can make the change if you're going to switch between them or create, as we propose tonight, some hybrid model of the two.
Brad, could you give us an update? Up until today, I guess this morning, the council had the idea that there wasn't a mixed model in North Carolina, that there wasn't precedent. Do you have any updates there?
Yes, Madam Vice Mayor, there currently is no other model existing in the state which is functioning under a hybrid half elected or partially elected and partially appointed model for a school board. However, there is some limited precedent in the state for this. If you go back to the late 70s, the city of Whiteville, which is fairly small out by the coast on the East Coast, actually had a school board which had some appointed members, oddly enough, appointed by the General Assembly and not by the local government, but they had also elected members as well. So there is some precedent in this. There is no specific authority granted in the state statute, which is North Carolina General Statute 115C-37, which establishes how school boards via either election or appointment are supposed to be set up. However, what we do know is that there's no prohibition against having a joint model like this. So I believe there is a good chance, given the precedent out there and the lack of prohibition against doing it, that this is a viable model for the city.
Any other questions, or do I have a motion? So we can hear hear the public comment on this.
I do have a motion, but I need some clarity from Brad really quick. Okay, so I'm fully in favor of a hybrid board, but I wanted to know if there's any way that we can alter the motion just a little bit concerning the membership to allow for 3 elected board members, 1 elected chair, and then 3 appointees, and that'll give us an even balance of elected board members, appointed board members, and then an elected chair who will then have some type of tie-breaking voting power.
I would also support that because it seems like you could have more options for subcommittees without worrying about the issues of a quorum.
Yes, Madam Vice Mayor, I believe that is doable. Again, the actual number of the board and the makeup of whether or not it would be a certain number of appointed versus a certain number of elected, and whether or not a chair is separately elected, can all be done via the local legislation. Again, right now, the state statute does not prescribe a specific number limit of how many board members actually are included in the board. That's taken care of via the local acts which set those up. Currently, we have a 5-member board, but it could be expanded along with these other changes.
So today we would have to suggest that we have 4 board members elected by the residents of the Asheville City School District. And then I think that's all we need to add in order to make that change, correct?
I think the proposed ordinance only says 2 appointments. And weren't you saying you wanted 3 appointed and 4 elected? So that would be just a little change.
But I think what he's saying here is we can change the board membership by local bylaw. The only thing that we have to get, is that correct?
No. You're just trying to clarify the motion. It would have to be in the legislation. So your motion would be to make a motion for a 7-member board, 4 of which are elected and 3 are appointed. One question I would have is, do you want the chair to be a separately elected position, like a mayor is a separate candidate on a ballot, or do you want the body to select the chair? That would mean that the chair would could end up being an appointed person or an elected person. They just would be only a tiebreaker vote in the way which is how a lot of cities have their mayor set up.
Okay, so here's the question. When is our next election or appointment for school boards? And does it line up with our mayoral and council elections?
We could set it.
Yeah, right now it's appointed right now, so it doesn't line up in terms of lining up with the municipal election. As part of the details of making any kind of transition to a different form, we would also have to then figure out as part of the local legislation what the methodology for election would be. And there's a few models out there which are probably most applicable to us. We could follow the Asheville City municipal elections, which is a nonpartisan primary taking place in over sort of March into November, and then with seats actually taking in December. That's not currently when they take their seats. You could also follow the county model, Buncombe County's model, which has no primary, but is a plurality method of election. Also, I believe they take their seats. Generally, it's done at the same schedule as the county elections, which the city is also on now as well. So that's something that would have to be thought out as part of any local bill about the election methodology, including when those people would take their seats. I think the first available option for us, economically speaking, because it does cost money to hold these elections, would be to have it run concurrently with the next municipal and county election in 2022.
Okay. I think Kim has a question.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to confirm with Brad, hopefully, that the membership of our Board of Education does not hinge on our population.
It does not. The only time that we would have to take population into consideration is if we decided to go to some sort of a district model, and then you've got to ensure that there is evenly divided representation amongst the districts. In other words, you couldn't have someone representing a very small district population-wise and someone else representing a very large district with the same voting power. But because I don't hear anyone proposing a district model for this, it's a plurality method, very similar to what city council is. I don't think population is a factor.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll take a stab at a motion if nobody else has a question.
I just had one brief one. How do most cities do it? Districts in North Carolina?
There is the vast majority are elected. And again, there is no other current hybrid model that I'm aware of in the state. Some do districts and some do a plurality method. So you get a little bit of both.
Okay, I'll take a stab at this motion, but just to clarify, I don't have to specify the elected chair seat, do I? I just need to add that there are 4 board members to be elected, correct? And then 3 appointed by city council.
And then the chair would be selected by the body. So once the school board is in place, they would select who's the chair. And I think that's actually pretty typical of elected school boards, that they would select the chair from amongst themselves.
I think that's right, Mayor. And let me add that the statute is going to be fairly consistent with regard to the term limits. This is similar to what we have right now, which is 4-year staggered terms. So we don't have to work this out now, but we would essentially have to make determinations once if a local bill was beginning to be drafted, how you would stagger the electeds and the appointeds so that everyone is not coming off at once. But you do not have to include that in your motion right now.
Okay. I make a motion that the local delegation of North Carolina General Assembly amend the selection process for membership of the Asheville School Board to allow 4 board members to be elected by the residents of the Asheville City School District and 3 appointed by the Asheville City Council. Also, that the chair be selected by the body.
Second, Kim Roney.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So what I'm thinking is unless anyone else has any questions or comments, we'll open up the speaker queue and allow and hear speakers. Just a couple of things. Is that all right, everybody? Yeah. Okay. As the vice mayor stated in her motion, just note for folks that are on the line, interestingly, the city school district only has about 40,000 people in it versus the entire city, which is approximately 93,000. So it's smaller and roughly does not include a lot of South Asheville, below Shiloh, and East Asheville. So just keep that in mind. And then North Asheville is like Swiss cheese and has houses next to other houses that aren't in it, and some are in it and some are out. So the other thing to keep in mind is that after this, we will have an opportunity to vote on the other option of an all-elected school board, but we will not take more public comment at that point. So we'll try to just do all of it now. And I do have a number of people that are signed up to speak under this item. Are we ready without further ado? Okay.
All right, our first caller is Honor Moore from North Asheville.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me? My name is Honor Moore, and I live in Asheville. I grew up in Asheville, and I attended Claxton and Newton Elementary. My very first teachers who taught me to read were Miss Cunningham and Miss Avery. I grew up during a very exciting time in a new progressive new education period in our district. First off, thank you to all of City Council for your service. Thank you to Esther Mannheimer, Sandra Kilgore, and Kim Roney for engaging with your constituents and being incredibly responsive to parents and stakeholders. Also, a shout out to the teachers at Asheville High. Go Cougars. I started the Asheville City Schools district-wide parent Facebook group 5 weeks ago as an effort to dialogue about school board selection. We are comprised of over 800 parents and educators. Needless to say, the cross-pollination of a very engaged online Asheville community has been a fertile ground for great ideas, mostly with equity in mind all the way. I support both a fully elected school board or a blended board of appointees and elected members. I am not for continuing on with the current status quo of a fully appointed system. Asheville and Chapel Hill have the highest per pupil spending in the state. Money is not our problem, but management of our budget is questionable at times. Why does a tiny district like ours have 4 superintendents? Why are we shutting down a perfectly amazing 5-star primary school that works and took years of money and development to become what it is today? Asheville Primary School is within 3 miles of 90% of our public housing. How does breaking up this preschool and putting it back into public housing help close the achievement gap? Why does our district seem to get rid of our best programs? How much of our local money is diverted to salaries in central offices? We need an elected or blended board so that there is more community engagement and accountability. In the 14 years since my son started kindergarten, there have been no significant gains in the achievement gap. We flip through superintendents and principals like drinking water in a hot desert. Parents want consistency, and we are tired of paying for golden parachutes and expensive consultants. If I felt our schools were better or stronger, I would not be here advocating for an elected school board. We have gotten worse, not better. Our central offices need both an equity and a financial audit. Finally, I ask City Council to consider assigning more than one school board liaison. It's the second largest city budget, and decisions are impacting thousands of voiceless students. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your service to all of the citizens of Asheville.
Council, our next caller is Laura Lustig from West Asheville.
Hi, this is Lara from West Asheville. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. I have 3 kids at Asheville City Schools, 1 at the high school and 2 at Asheville Primary. This year, I learned a bit about the school board as they approved the new superintendent's recommendation to empty Asheville Primary School, retire the school number, and evict 2 fully enrolled programs that are both proven to create equitable outcomes for students, public Montessori and 5-star pre-K classrooms. As families, we were shocked. There was no attempt to include us in collaboration or problem solving. There was no transparency, no true comparison of costs, no long-term planning, and very squishy numbers. Most of our emails solicited no response at all from the board or from the latest superintendent they hired. This mode of operation is unacceptable. I fully support an elected school board or a hybrid option because I believe an elected board would be more responsive to ACS families. Listening to my fellow families, I support the hybrid model as long as the appointments are made for the intention of equity and inclusivity and representation of all ACS families. Thank you very much.
Council, our next caller is Ruffin from North Asheville.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I guess I will follow my peers there. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Hello? Okay, great. My name is Ruffin. I live in North Asheville, 28804, reside in the town of Woodfin. I've been in Asheville since 2010. Both of my boys began their formal education in Asheville City Schools beginning in kindergarten. They both attended Ira B. Jones Elementary for their elementary education. One is now at Montfort North Star Academy, and one is currently at SILSA. My comments tonight are in support of a hybrid school board. However, I will support an elected one as well. We all know that nationwide, 95% of school boards are elected. We also know that there are other models, appointed and hybrid. Research from Kenneth Wong, Brown University, says that appointed boards improve academic performance and district management with better performance in closing opportunity and achievement gaps, plus increasing graduation rates. However, we know that is not the case of an appointed school board for Asheville City Schools. We have not seen those outcomes. We have the largest racial achievement gap in the state of North Carolina. Typically, appointed boards were implemented for failing districts, and appointed boards usually implied that the community was incapable of running their own district. However, we know that our community is capable. Therefore, I'm in support of a hybrid school board or an elected school board. Now, I'm not a researcher or expert in school governance. However, I do know that we cannot continue with what we've always done since 1932. We must move beyond the status quo with a dramatic change, something revolutionary. I don't suspect that this change is a panacea for all of the challenges of Asheville City Schools. However, now is the time. It is imperative to flip the script, reverse the status quo and typical norms, and be revolutionary in school governance for better outcomes for all of our children, where all kids experience academic success and proficiencies in math, reading, and so forth. Yes, hybrid is a new model. Within the past decade, it is considered one of the newest forms of school governance, and not many districts engage in the hybrid model. However, I did find that PG County Schools in Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C., has a hybrid school board model. The state of Maryland actually has 3 counties that use the hybrid model, as well as hybrid is used in the state of Connecticut. I didn't do research on all states, but just to give you an idea. I do believe that Asheville City Council should enable the people, the voters.
Council, our next caller is Corey Price from West Asheville. Can you hear anything? I'm gonna unmute.
Modeling equity, inclusion, and
Corey,
diversity.
Corey, I'm so sorry. The council wasn't able to hear you. Will you start over, please?
Yes, can they hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Hi, my name is Corey Price, and I'm a former public school teacher. I'm a child advocate, and I'm the owner of Evolve Early Learning, a preschool that is centering equity and inclusion. And I want to ensure that all students who go to Asheville City Schools, including my own children someday, really have the opportunity to thrive. And I think it's really important that we have an elected board in order to really show that we are standing behind equity, inclusion, and diversity, and really asking the people who know, former teachers like Libby Kiles, Pepe, who I saw in so many of Johnston Elementary hallways teaching kids to read, and Kate, who is a parent and an advocate for the longest time, for them not to be included in our board conversation. That is really not what we need right now. We need to come together and we need to listen to the people who've been in the trenches for so long. I really hope you consider ensuring that we have an elected board. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Valeria from Montford.
I've been learning a lot through the parents and the teacher community and the advocates for the kids in the last few months. And I do
Valeria, I'm
very
going to
much.
cut you off. I'm sorry. Can you start over? We didn't hear the first of your remarks. Can you
Okay.
start over, please?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Please start over. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Well, my name is Valeria Huayra. I'm the mom of a first grader at Isaac Dixon and a seventh grader at Asheville Middle School. And the reason why I wanted to show up today and support was because as a mom and as a just member of the community, I have been watching and listening and appreciating so much the work, really selfless and dedicated of our teachers and parents like Pepe Acebo and Libby Kiles. I know them both personally because of our kids being in their school, being Libby's students, and knowing them as parents. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys heard from us, from just the people of the community, on how much we do need our voices heard in the conversations regarding our schools. For as long as I've been part of the school community as a mom, I feel like that has been consistently missing, the voice of the parents. And as parents, we are also the voice of the teachers. So anyways, that's why I was here to show my support for these two individuals that I have seen working so dedicated and selfless for all of us. Thank you so much.
Council, our next caller is Jonathan Wainscott from West Asheville. I'm going to unmute.
Hello, can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, hi, this is Jonathan Wainscott, and I just want to thank the mayor for starting the conversation. I think it's a little bit hasty to put this in motion, as Ms. Mosley said in the Asheville Citizen Times on Friday when this just dropped, that we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to take into consideration the voice of minorities in Asheville as it pertains to this issue. And I couldn't agree more. Establishing an election is pretty much one of the most important things we can do, especially when it involves the election of our school board and our children. So I definitely think that we should be using the Department of Equity and Inclusion in this, and I don't see how they possibly could have been involved with this short notice. I just wanted to chime in on some things about the Chapel Hill Carborough City School System, which seems to be quite similar to Asheville's, although it is two cities. It's 12,000 students compared to Asheville City's 4,400, and their per pupil spending, according to Carolina Public Press, is 2.75 times the state average, and they are considered the best school district overall by niche rankings, and the 5 best school district in the state for hiring qualified teachers, and they are the 2nd worst in the nation for their achievement gap between blacks and whites. And the Asheville City School System spends more than double the average, the state average for per pupil spending, and we have ranked the 6th best overall by niche rankings in North Carolina. We're 21 best for best teachers, and we're the 5th largest achievement gap in the nation. I think that the conversation that we need to be having is about the consolidation of the Asheville City School System with the Buncombe County School System. Wake County School Systems operates as one system, and it manages 162,000 students. Charlotte-Mecklenburg is 148,000 students, and that's one district. Guilford County is 73,000 students, and that's all handled by one district. Oh, and Ms. Turner, the Chapel Hill Carborough School District is voted at large, if you were wondering about that. Buncombe County is the number 14th largest school district in the state, and if it absorbed the Asheville City School System, it would only jump to number 11 with 28,000 students. It seems as though we are paying a premium in Asheville for the dividend so that the haves can have better and the have-nots can get a vote or a task force. And I think it's just time to end this experiment with the Asheville City Schools entirely. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye.
Our next caller is Katie Pett from West Asheville. Katie, I'm going to open your line. You will not hear the computer prompts.
Good evening, council members. I am speaking tonight as a parent and concerned community member, not representing any organization or group. Let me begin by thanking you. Thank you for taking up this critical issue and bringing our schools and the needs of our children to center stage. It's my opinion that our community should be regularly wrestling with the performance of our schools, and City Council has a special opportunity and responsibility to draw the community's attention to the performance and needs of our schools. Earlier tonight, I listened at the Equity and Inclusion Report, and I thought it is perfect that this report and this topic are presented at the same meeting. We will not become a more equitable city until we achieve greater equity in the success of our children and in our schools. I will read tonight from a petition which gathered more than 400 signatures in 3 days. This petition has the signatures of former members of the Board of Education, current and retired educators of the Asheville City Schools, parents, grandparents, school volunteers, and community champions from across the city. You'll get a PDF of the signatures in the City Council email box tonight. From the petition, families, educators, and community members formally call for a resolution that the Asheville City Schools Board of Education be elected by the citizens of our city. We also recommend that City Council pursue options to expand the Board of Education by 2 additional seats through appointment. A hybrid board composed of elected and appointed members would balance the need for accountability with the need for unity and full representation of our children. We believe that an expanded board would be able to develop a committee structure that could learn from and with our community and address persistent challenges. We wrote this petition before seeing the resolutions on the agenda tonight, so it does not fit perfectly into the choices you have before you, but it is very close to the resolution just made by Councilwoman Smith. What is very clear is that the community is calling for change right away. We know that children's lives in school are very short and they need change now. There is broad agreement that the majority of the board should be elected and that there be a mechanism to appoint members so that underrepresented voices are not silenced. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your good work in leading our city. Good night.
Council, our next caller is Jensen Gelfond from West Asheville. Jensen, your line is now open.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Jensen Gelfond. I live in West Asheville. I am the husband of a teacher, and I am calling you tonight to advocate for a move to an elected school board. Part of being husband of a teacher is just being able to kind of see behind the scenes what's going on, what kind of decisions are being made, and how that affects children and families. And I've started following over, especially the last few months, how the school board has been operating. And I was just really shocked and disappointed when I actually started attending meetings, especially most recently, how families and staff were not meaningfully involved when it came to the safe reopening of the schools. There was no dialogue between the school board or the Asheville City school system and families. It was a broken process, and I'm very concerned that there will be consequences over the next few weeks and months as people come back to school without any kind of true community effort. We just need better leadership. Also concerned that there's a suppression of public comment by the school board. I went to the last school board meeting, and the only way to give public comment was at that meeting. I did not want to go to that meeting and expose myself to COVID. There were people in that room on the board or leading the board who were recently COVID positive. It didn't feel like a safe space, but I nonetheless went to make my voice heard. But I can't imagine how many people wanted to speak to the school board and did not because they suppressed the ability to give a public comment remotely. This is just one of many times when public comment has been suppressed or completely ignored by the existing appointed school board. I just have seen over the last few months a lack of inquisitiveness or critical thinking or advocacy for our children. It feels like a rubber stamp process with no accountability. And finally, I just feel very strongly that the Asheville Primary School, which is a shining star of equity, if we talk about reparations and ways to help those who need the help the most in our community, places like Asheville Primary that provide a quality Montessori education. I have not heard a single school board member or district leader talk about the importance of Montessori and how the fact that we have a public Montessori school, the only one in Western North Carolina, that's a public school, a free education for those who need it. They're looking to close it down. They've frozen enrollment. They're not listening to families, and it makes me upset. My move is yes for election. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Laura D'Angelo. Laura, your line is open.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, great. Hi, I'm Laura D'Angelo, of Asheville City School parent, and I just appreciate the time to be here tonight because with the important issues of a growing racial achievement gap, safety in the pandemic, expansion of our preschool programs, and the fate of our public Montessori Asheville Primary School, it's more important than ever that the Board of Education and the Asheville City Council subscribe to the notion of nothing for us without us. Educators and parents are gathering here, many naming that our system of appointing the Board of Education has failed, and I urge you to listen to us. I applaud the mayor for bringing this issue to the table and support the idea of creating either an elected or hybrid model and ask that we ask our teachers to guide us in that process. My son was in the first kindergarten class at Asheville Primary School, so it was 4.5 years ago that I attended my first Board of Ed meeting to advocate for expanding the school to 4th and 5th grade. And I was immediately surprised and disappointed at what I encountered. The process I engaged in of collaborating with other Asheville Primary parents to draft a thoughtful public comment was delivered in 5 minutes to an unresponsive board and led to no conversation, resulted in zero follow-up and no collaboration. I was left after that meeting with a sense that our system is broken. Since that time, I have attended a variety of board meetings, written countless emails, engaged in a district-wide PTO, and this sense that our system is broken has only been reinforced. There appears to be no avenue for interactive dialogue. Emails are generally met with no response. Current board members have publicly stated that they don't read their emails. When the superintendent was appointed by the school board, there was a lot of fanfare collecting data and feedback from parents and teachers, but it's not clear exactly how this data informed the decision to choose this superintendent who has been known to have a lack of transparency and clearly appears to be continuing this trend. I am a parent who has been able to take the time out to be on PTOs, draft emails, and attend board meetings. And still, my voice is unheard and I feel disempowered. This implies to me that a parent who just doesn't have this time and tries to get their voice heard is almost definitely going to meet with a sense of powerlessness and frustration. Parents are one of the major stakeholders that board are here to represent, and the board's job is to help build bridges among parents, school leadership, and other sectors of the community. So if parents are not guiding in part the Board of Ed decisions, what stakeholders are being heard? As you know, the Asheville City Association of Educators and the Buncombe County Association of Educators endorsed 3 applicants to the city school board. All these applicants have been ignored by the city council. Our teachers are major stakeholders, and their efforts to create positive change on the school board is being ignored. Our district is 14th in the state for average teacher pay, and we have much higher housing costs and living expenses. I ask you, are these stakeholders being
Council, our next caller is Brooke Heaton from West Asheville. Brooke, your line is now open.
Hi there. Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to consider this very important issue. I applaud you for taking up the issue and also for proposing 2 solutions. I strongly encourage you to adopt either solution, either resolution for an elected school board for Asheville City Schools. As the father of a preschool student in the district and a graduate of public school, I'm a staunch proponent not only of public education, but also of strong community involvement in our schools. As one of only 2 districts in North Carolina and just a part of 6% of the districts across the nation to have an appointed school board, Asheville continues to silence the voices of its residents when it comes to public education. While the vast majority of school districts empower their residents to select board members, our patronizing system is stuck in an era now over a century old. The issue at hand is not just one of democratic representation, but also of transparency and accountability. While Asheville City Schools continues to struggle to close the achievement gap, they are now running into a very alarming financial situation, having spent a fund balance in excess of $13.5 million and now facing a potential multi-million-dollar deficit. Throughout this time, Asheville City School board members have failed to implement any meaningful measures to change course. Presented with a measure to install solar energy on numerous school buildings in order to save over $6 million over the course of 30 years, the school board balked and nearly turned down the plan. Presented with years of maintenance neglect at the Asheville Primary School, the board approved a measure to investigate the sale of the building at its December 14th meeting, a motion the superintendent now says, quote, nobody is talking about, unquote. And the list of questionable decisions, head-scratching misinformation, and trust-breaking efforts to exclude the voices of our most informed citizens is beyond alarming. So let's face it, our board is dysfunctional. Our school system needs new leadership. And I encourage you to approve a resolution for an elected school board, and also to consider for appointments in this current appointment cycle those candidates that were endorsed by the Asheville City Association of Educators who are broadly supported by our community's teachers and families. Thank you very much.
Council, our next caller is Dewana Little. Ms. Little, your line is open.
I'm calling to stress the importance of this decision, and I'm in favor of the hybrid. I do look at the full elected school board process as being potentially hazardous and a mechanism to marginalize out the low population of Black people within the city limits, the city school district. And so I definitely am in favor of this move to a hybrid board with the increase of members on that board to be able to do the work and to be held accountable, with the city council holding that power to hold the school board accountable to implementing processes and structures that educate all of our kids. It's not about one or the other. It's about all of our kids getting an education. And I do feel that the process and the move to a hybrid board will be in the best interest of our kids. And thank y'all for the consideration and doing the research behind it to see what the structure will look like here.
Happy
Thank
birthday,
you.
Luana.
Oh, thank you.
Council, our next caller is Keola Smallwood. Keola, your line is now open.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
First of all, I would like to thank the council for the work that you've done. There's obviously been a lot of good work done. I live in North Asheville. I live in Montfort. I am not an Asheville City Schools parent. I am a retired educator, and I am here to speak on behalf of parents in the Black community who would love to be here to speak tonight, but they are working multiple jobs to make ends meet, to supply the needs of their households. I am in favor of the hybrid model because I think the city council should have some involvement to ensure that we have proper accountability and transparency in education. And we want to be mindful that the heart and soul of what we do are our children. The heart and soul of what we do are the parents of those children. So I feel like I'm obligated to listen to children, listen to parents, help school staff. You know, I had a wonderful meeting with staff at Asheville Middle School today, you know, and these people are committed to doing good things for our children. And I am so grateful to all of you for all the hard work that you've done. And I like the hybrid model because it allows people to have a voice in what happens in their schools and in their children's lives. This is their children's lives, their futures. And I think we should be very supportive of that. If an elected school board were chosen, I am not opposed to supporting an elected school board either. But hybrid is by all, any stretch of the imagination, that is the model that I like best. And thank you very much for listening.
Council, our next caller is Shifra Ehlers from Asheville. Your line is open.
Hi, my name is Shifra Ehlers. My husband Jordan is a fourth generation Ashevillean. We've lived in the city of Asheville for over 20 years and we have 6 children. The Asheville City School Board has failed my family, and we've made the difficult decision to send our oldest children to a charter school. Our youngest is currently enrolled at Asheville Primary. We believe that is the best school in the district, and we're devastated that the school board has determined that APS is expendable and is moving to a program within Hall Fletcher, limiting enrollment and closing classrooms. City council should be alarmed by these events. We keep hearing about improving racial equity. Asheville Primary has a long-standing anti-bias, anti-racism statement that is promoted in the daily learning at the school. APS is actively teaching children and families how to live in a peaceful and unifying world where differences are celebrated. The Asheville City School Board needs to be changed. In its current configuration, the school board is cloaked in secrecy. The teachers and parents don't know what is going on much of the time. There's no response to emails, and sadly, they often misrepresent the facts. These are not the people we want setting the example for our community, and certainly not for our children. Spending $90,000 on a PR firm to label the desegregation order as antiquated racial quotas that were put into place 30 years ago is offensive to white families and families of color. We also have more administrative positions than we need, but we know the district is not spending money on the things that matter, the teachers that create the quality education that our children deserve. This demonstrates a lack of fiduciary responsibility. Teachers and students were sent back to school without a plan, without having teachers vaccinated, demonstrating a lack of concern and a lack of care for the well-being of our entire community. Many teachers are now forced into the classroom in spite of their pre-existing conditions if they want to keep their jobs. Why can't those teachers teach the virtual kids from home? The inhabitants of the city of Asheville have entrusted you with the welfare of our children and families, and we're looking to you for direction. I urge you on behalf of all the families of Asheville Primary School, our entire community, to continue to consider an elected or a hybrid school board that fairly represents the stakeholders. We expect to have open communication with the people who lead, and we request honesty in all interactions. Please recognize that the families of the Asheville City School District are deeply displeased with the current school board. There's a reason why we have lost nearly 10% of our students. We require change if you want us to trust the process. We require change if you want us to trust you. Please amend the school board to one that reflects the goals of our
Council, our next caller is Kate Fisher from Central Asheville. Kate, your line is now open.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. My name is Kate Fisher. Thank you so much for considering adding this process to the legislative agenda. I know that it's complicated, especially trying to do what is my preferred option, which would be a partially elected and partially appointed board. The one thing I would like to suggest that Council look into is the number that we're asking for, because the last time I looked into it, the UNC School of Government was very clear that we would not be allowed to have a board that was bigger than 5 because we're a city district within a county. So I encourage the council to look into that to make sure that we don't accidentally ask for something that we can't have. So just be careful with that number thing. I spent some time today reading over General Statute 115C, Article 5, which governs over and outlines how boards of education are supposed to function in North Carolina schools. In Asheville, we have a board that does not use the power granted to it, and it is vast. We haven't appointed experts in education to our board, so I don't really believe they're up to the tasks that they face, and I think that's why we are where we are now. The board is empowered by the General Assembly to be the educational leader in a school district. You may not realize that school boards in North Carolina are that, but they are actually the governing bodies for schools. If parents, teachers, and staff have concerns, and you call, for example, the North Carolina Public Instruction Department, they will refer you to your local school board. They don't say call the superintendent. They say talk to your school board. That's how it's supposed to work. That's who's supposed to hold the district and the schools accountable to the children they're supposed to educate. GS 115C, Article 5, gives the board 64 specific responsibilities. School boards are not rubber stamp organizations who just hire and fire superintendents. They're supposed to run their districts. They're supposed to fiercely protect the missions of the schools. They're supposed to fiercely protect the educating of our children. And I don't feel like that's happening in our board now. They're failing to use the power that is granted to them to steer our district. Whether elected or appointed, our board has to be excellent. Elected or appointed, our board must be held accountable. For now, we look to you for this. It is exciting to think we have an option in the future for it to look different, but our children, in this moment, need the board to be held accountable now. I'm asking for your help with that while we're working towards something new. I have 3 requests. First, please consider all the people who applied to be appointed to school board this round. You chose to cut some very qualified candidates, including me, and I think it's a mistake. Our years of experience and expertise and talents would be good for the board. It's important to expand the field because my second request is that you appoint 3 new board members this go around. We cannot wait. The district is failing our children. Nothing has changed for them in the 2 to 6 years they've been serving.
Council, our next caller is Kathy from West Asheville. Kathy, your line is open.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'm Kathy Hohenstein. I'm from West Asheville, and I've been associated or involved with the Asheville City Schools since I came in 1997 and was the dietitian at our school-based health centers. And then over the years, I've worked with Healthy Buncombe. We've worked with the School Health Advisory Councils to help support a healthy environment and where kids can be physically active, eating healthy, and a lot of change. So we did get some changes in the early years when I was here. I also have been, in the last 17 years, the Family Consumer Science Agent with Cooperative Extension in Buncombe County, and have done interactions with the schools through that position, as well as with early childhood education. So for a while, I was on the programming board with Smart Start and also doing food safety trainings with the cafeteria staff. I do have two children. One has gone through the school system. She started in 2005, and my son is a junior at Asheville High now. So I've been involved as a community member and as a parent. And I do want to voice support for change. We need the change now with the school board. I do support the hybrid model, and then I also do support, if we can do it, a full elected board if they do not go with the hybrid model. The numbers need to be more elected than appointed. I also do want to give support for the city council now to make some changes. I think you had a wide pool to choose from for appointing 3 new board members to the Board of Education, and I think you need to consider all of them. And I would strongly stress considering the Asheville City Schools Association of Educators, because they did surveys, questionnaires of all the applicants. And so they have chosen 3 that they support, but I think you need to keep your minds open for all of the applicants and really look for that balance for some new voices and some new energy into the Board of Education, because our school district really needs that at this point. So I appreciate you hearing from all of us and this long list of people tonight. And I'm actually traveling back, so I am going to end there. Thank you.
So our next caller is Trey Williams from West Asheville. Trey, your line is now open.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. I'll try to keep this pretty brief. My name is Trey. I live in West Asheville. I grew up here, went to Jones Elementary, Jones Primary at the time, then Asheville Middle and Asheville High School. And I'm currently getting my master's degree in school counseling. And a lot of my independent research is focused on justice and equity in schools and how to eliminate the opportunity gap. And so I really appreciate the Vice Mayor's motion and y'all's support and consideration of these different models and your desire for equity and the lens that you're seeing all of this through. I do support the hybrid model for that reason. I think it makes the most sense from an equity standpoint, just in terms of a board that is representative of the community, and just ensuring that the whole community is represented, and that the Black and Brown community is not falling to the wayside, as we are a smaller percentage of the Asheville population. So I appreciate y'all's consideration. Once again, I support the hybrid model, and thank you for all you're doing.
Our next caller is Samantha Simpson. Samantha, your line is open.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, my name's Sammy Simpson. Hello, City Council. I am a parent of 3 kids that have been in Asheville City Schools since 2008. One has dropped out of Asheville High, one is now in Silsa, and one is now at Isaac Dixon, and they are staying remote for the rest of the year. I've also worked in the schools with America Reads program, which is a AB Tech work study a few years back in Hall Fletcher and what's now Lucy Herring School. So I've seen a lot of issues over the years personally with the schools. And I just wanted to thank you, Mayor Manheimer, for adding the school board discussion to the city council agenda. I was shocked when a month ago I found out we don't have an elected school board. I did not grow up here or go to school here. I'm a proud graduate of Lower Merion School District, which is a suburb of Philly. It's a well-funded, diverse school. Kobe Bryant was 2 years ahead of me. Anyway, I just wanted to say I am for an elected school board if it is elected by the people of the Asheville City School District, like parents, staff, and students. A hybrid board is an interesting idea, but let's remember that Asheville's follow-through on new things isn't always the best thing. And everyone else in the state, except one other county or city, has an elected school board. So maybe it should be the NC standard of public education to have an elected school board. That's just my opinion. However, I would also say that if a hybrid is truly necessary so that Black voices in Asheville are heard, then I agree we need a hybrid. But I think if everyone else is doing it elected, we should do it elected. I also want to mention that the board, usually I don't really pay attention to the board. However, I just wanted to mention something recently that happened that directly affected me, which is a decision of the board, which was I was waitlisted for my kid to be in a pod since August. And then they approved more pods, apparently, and all the way down to my teacher telling me a date so that I could turn to an employer and say, yes, I can make it to work because my kid's going to be in a pod. Then it come to find out they didn't follow through. So, and it wasn't the school, it was the board. So that's how far it got to me, and it shouldn't have gotten that far. So I just want to mention that. Big decisions are being made. Money is being spent on people to communicate with us when they could just open it up and communicate with us. Parents, staff, you know, there's really, like, they had an online meeting that was remote, and then they had an in-person meeting, making it more harder for people to equitably, you know, participate. The other thing I want to say is I am recommending my choices here for the Asheville City School Board because there are 3 positions that are opening up, and City Council, you get to decide who they are. You're down to 8.
Council, our next caller is Libby Kiles. Libby, your line is now open.
Good evening. Thank you guys for allowing me to speak. My name is Libby Kiles, and I am a native of Asheville. I graduated from Asheville High in 1989. I'm a 22-year veteran teacher and have been a part of 3 grassroots organizations and a part of those startup boards. I am concerned about the direction of our district in terms of educating all of our students. In addition to being a native and a teacher, I'm also a parent. I have a 6th grader at Montfort North Star and a 5th grader at Isaac Dixon. I think it's important for ACS to have an elected school board to improve the decision-making process for all of our students and to remove the spirit of fear that currently exists amongst employees of Asheville City Schools. We need a mechanism to hold school boards responsible for the decisions that they make. In the past 7 years, we've had 3 superintendents with an overinflated central office in which people who have not been efficient at doing their jobs have gotten promoted, while people who are earnestly doing the work have been blocked repeatedly from making changes that could impact the learning and growth of all of our students. We should not have a board that is unwilling to interact with all of its constituents and is unwilling to have public discourse concerning the systemic issues that are affecting our district. It is not an effective method to call parents racist when they ask to be informed and included, nor is it effective to character assassinate Black people who seek the same thing. It is imperative that we have a board whose members understand the fiduciary responsibility of the board and also understand the importance of healthy discourse so that we are giving ideas back and forth and creating compromise so that we can have a district where all of our students are surviving and thriving. I'm disappointed in the lack of knowledge of City Council as it relates to what's happening in Asheville City Schools. Council members talk about being concerned about not hearing from teachers, but continue to vote for an exclusionary process. We have a liaison who appears to not have any knowledge concerning what's been happening in our district for the past 6 years. For all of these reasons, I support an elected board that's a hybrid model. But if the choice comes down to being appointed versus elected, I would err on the side of appointment. Equity is important. Equity for all of our students is important. It's important that we as a community are united. The primary goal of a school board is to make sure that all of the children in the district receive the best education possible. And in order for us to do that, we need to be able to hold the boards responsible for the actions that they take. We need to be able to hold them responsible when they are not responsible. Thank you.
Council, our final caller is Daniel Young from West Asheville. Daniel, your line is open. Daniel, your line is open. All right, Council, that was our last caller for this section.
Thank you. All right, Council, we have, just to restate, we have a motion and a second to recommend to the legislature or to indicate our support to the legislature for an expanded school board to 7 members, 4 being elected and 3 being appointed, and the chair being selected by the body. We have a motion and a second for that, and we just heard public comment. We can vote on that motion, or if you would like to have some discussion, that is obviously fine as well. Okay.
Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have Daniel on the phone.
Oh, okay, Daniel. All right.
Never mind. The person exited. I'm sorry.
Mayor, I do have a quick question of clarification. So we could make this recommendation and the legislature could decide to accept our recommendation or do something that they decide, like instead of doing a school board, roll Asheville City Schools into Buncombe County Schools. Is that a possibility?
Yes, I mean, that is that's a possibility theoretically at any time, but yes, we would certainly be putting the question of an elected school board before them. And honestly, that suggestion has been offered by some legislators in the past.
Question also. So let me get some clarification here. When you were speaking about the hybrid board and the elected board earlier, and you were stating something as far as options, because you're not sure as to how the General Assembly will look at it or whatever. So what exactly are you suggesting? That we actually send 2 options to see if one gets through, or what? I'm a little confused.
Yes, what I would suggest is we have a motion and a second for this hybrid model. And I would say after we vote on that we secondarily also vote on the fully elected school board option, just in case for some reason the hybrid model is proposed that either doesn't work, or as Antoinette suggested, the legislature decides they don't want to do that. They want to do something else, that we have given them our support or lack thereof for a fully elected board, just so they know. Again, we can't make law on this. We can't, our vote is just a show of support or lack of support, whichever way. We're just giving our opinion.
Okay, so basically both would go down as suggestions for them to actually
consider.
Okay, thank you.
This is Kim. I will just add that I know that there are still neighbors who are concerned about having an elected board. And I have those same concerns about ensuring equitable representation at the table. There's been so many times when Asheville had an opportunity to lead, and I think this is one of them. If a hybrid elected and appointed board means that other cities in the state of North Carolina might have the opportunity to address equity at their tables as well, I'm hopeful that we can build that coalition across the state, and that's why I strongly support it.
Again, my concern is that we may be opening Pandora's box and potentially going as far away from equity as imaginable in this instance. So again, if we roll into Buncombe County schools, is that a more equitable outcome? I just wonder, are our voices in fact decreased?
I hear that concern, Antoinette. And you know, what I've been hearing folks reaching out about is a concern that if we don't increase accountability at the polls so that voters can have a say, then they may feel that the only request they have left is to ask the state directly. And my concern that actually opens up the Pandora's box.
My thought is that they wouldn't get a chance to act directly. Based on our actions, we would be opening the door to the legislature.
Council, are there any other questions or comments before we vote on this item? Okay. I just want to explain my vote. I am supportive of a fully elected school board. I have my doubts about a hybrid model. I mean, I hear the concerns, and I'm not terribly convinced that a hybrid model is going to be effective. And I also am concerned that it is so very difficult for us to get legislation in the first place that, I think it'll be difficult to go back and try to change this. I'm very torn, and I don't want to support the hybrid model just because of my the long game and my concerns about the long game here, but I do want to support a fully elected school board. So when you hear me, but it sounds like there's a lot of support for the hybrid. So that will be a strong indication for the legislative delegation. So with that, I'm going to do a roll call vote, and it starts with Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Okay, and Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
And myself, nay. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Okay, Councilwoman Mosley.
No.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Okay. Okay. Is there someone willing to make a motion for the fully elected school board option?
I would like to make a motion. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Can I just ask a quick question? So if
Can we,
I mean, it's sort of feels like ranked choice voting. So I guess my question is if I vote yes, is there a way to kind of say my preference would be?
And say that, if you would like to say that. I mean, look, we're talking about a legislative process. I mean, I spent 4 years working in the legislature as an attorney, and it's very hard to predict what will happen. I mean, as Councilwoman Mosley pointed out, there can be all kinds of issues that happen down there, and reasons that bills get changed and legislation gets modified, but we can do the best we can to indicate what we do support. So, I've been in communication with Representative Brian Turner. Representative Fisher's mother passed away suddenly this week, and so she is, obviously dealing with that, but he is keeping her informed. So I'm doing my best to try to explain. I did call ahead of time and say, we're going to consider these two options, and here's what's happening. And so we will do our best to convey to them. And I think if you do have a preference, even if you're supporting both, if you have a preference, to indicate that would be important. So Councilwoman Kilgore, you made the were you making a motion?
Yes, I was making a motion that council move to an elected school board.
Okay.
I'll second. This is Sage.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote.
Before we do the roll call vote.
Before we do that, if anyone has, yes.
So this is Kim, and I just want to state publicly that I strongly prefer the hybrid board to a fully elected board, but I will be supporting the elected board.
Okay, that's helpful.
And I would like to say that I won't be supporting it because for some people, they feel that we're moving from one extreme to the next extreme, and that we'll always have a group of people who are dissatisfied.
Anyone else before we vote? Okay. Okay, Vice Mayor Smith?
Nay.
Myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore?
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley?
No.
Councilwoman Roney?
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner?
Aye.
And Councilwoman Whistler?
Again, with a strong preference for the hybrid, I'm an aye.
Okay. Well, we have sent them a confusing signal of 5 to 2 votes, but very nuanced differences that that I will do my best to explain to them. All right, so thank you. All right, Council, that concludes the discussion around elected/appointed school boards, and now leads us to the informal discussion public comment portion of our agenda. We do have a number of people signed up to speak. Maybe Maggie knows it looks like slightly over 20 people. So settle in, and here we go. All right, staff, please begin. Okay, there might be a little caller. Oh, here we go.
Our first caller is Lara Lustig of West Asheville. Lara, your line is. Yes, we can hear you.
No, we can't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Pause. We can't hear you. Just a second. Can you hear me now? Go ahead.
How about now? All right.
Yeah. Thank
Lara
you.
Lustig, West Asheville. 3 kids in Asheville City Schools, 1 at the high school, 2 at the primary. First, let me say that we are so fortunate to have so many incredible resources at ACS. I'm so grateful to our dedicated teachers, assistants, nutrition and custodial staff, counselors, social workers, and administrators who have been working so hard for our children in this truly wild year. Our family is deeply, deeply grateful to them. The fact remains that with some of the highest per pupil spending in our state and some of the worst racial disparities in student outcomes, ACS is failing our children. Where is all that money going if it's not being used to support our kids? It's not going into teacher pay. Our district is 14th in the state for average teacher pay, and we have much higher housing costs and living expenses than much of the state. How is that money being spent? I believe we have a right to know. This is taxpayer money, and we have a right to call ACS and the school board to account for how it is being used or potentially misused. As the ACS fund balance continues to shrink by millions every year, the district certainly doesn't need to spend $90,000 on outside consultants to hold another round of listening sessions. There have been 5 rounds of listening sessions in the past 10 years. They're not listening. Our current school board has failed to provide the vision, leadership, and fiduciary oversight of the district that our children deserve. They have hired superintendents who have started initiative after initiative without sticking to one plan to produce real results for our kids. They have blamed teachers and parents for the district's failures. They have let the district continue to drain resources while maintaining worsening outcomes for our Black children. We families have no reason to think that the current board members would change this trend if reappointed, and neither should you. Please do not reappoint the current board members. We don't need more of the same. Look at the outcomes. Please listen to educators. Follow the ACAE endorsements and appoint Libby Kiles, Jackie Carr-McCarg, and Pepe Acebo to the ACS school board. We need strong skills and brave leadership to turn this district around and set us in the right direction. Deeply focused on the success of all our kids. Representation by city council is the only avenue we as families have for school board accountability right now. Please take the opportunity to make real change for the good of our children and our city. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Greenleaf Clark from North Asheville. Greenleaf, your line is now open.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Paraphrasing from Cesar Hernandez, to reform the prison is to perpetuate it and the violence it inflicts. To reform policing is to perpetuate it and the violence it inflicts. To find fault in these institutions is to see them as they have always operated and just as they are intended to. The faults in policing are not failings, they are design features. Earlier today, Esther reprimanded Councilperson Roney in reminding her that council is merely a policy-making body that provides direction to the city manager. Unfortunately, on paper, Esther is right. Perhaps this is just another one of those institutions functioning as designed, using bureaucracy to suppress justice. You might just keep accepting that this institution is designed to perpetuate violence, abide by the precedent of white supremacists, and make excuses for not affecting any real change. 5 of you might vote to swing the door wide open for hotels to gentrify Asheville and vote to sacrifice the working class of the city at the altar of capitalism. Well, you did that, and the human suffering is on your hands. Other than members Roney and Smith, you did not choose the value of human life over some y'all's absurd lingual attachment to the boot soles of hoteliers. Or you could be resisting. Having an office of equity and inclusion is great, but it isn't enough if you keep making decisions like this. Remember, simply reforming these institutions is to perpetuate them and the violence they inflict, especially if it's in the absence of real change. The reality is that there are so many tactics for resisting harm if you simply choose to leverage your platform of privilege. And in at least one way, the path to real change is not nebulous. The people of Asheville have been calling for an abolition to policing, and knowing your style, we offered a transitional step for y'all last year in defunding the police by at least 50%. During the budget work session earlier today, Esther set the table with these words ready for later consumption. It is really important that we don't wake up 2 weeks before the deadline and say, I want to turn this on its head. It's important to give as much direction as you can, as early as you can. Hey, Esther, we are giving you direction, loud and clear, and as early as we can, defund the police.
Council, our next caller is Jonathan Wainscott from West Asheville. Jonathan, your line is open. Council, we'll come back to Jonathan.
Council, our next caller is Jensen Gelfond. Jensen, your line is now open.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Yes, this is Jensen Gelfond, living in West Asheville. Just wanted to talk about the appointments that you'll all be making in the interim while we hope to push through these elected school board here. And just the limiting that was undertaken by the boards and commissions committee. I did attend that meeting, and there was very little discussion during that meeting or any kind of information given to the public about the process that that committee went through to push forward the people who were supposed to get the more thorough vetting by City Council and to suppress the ability of other worthy board members from getting a full consideration. So yes, I would ask that you look at the full slate of candidates. There are great candidates out there. The Asheville City Association of Educators has worked to put together a list of people who are advocating for our teachers and for our young ones. I myself have had a chance to start to get to know some of the people who have put together an application to be on the school board. And I would like to specifically point out Libby Kiles and Pepe Acebo as two people who I've been able to be lucky enough to meet recently and who seem real, genuine Ashevilleans willing to put in the elbow grease and long hours to understand what's going on, to communicate with the community, to be open and inclusive. These are the kinds of people that we need. Certainly not reappointing existing school board members when there's already a massive wave of Ashevilleans crying out that those members are not serving our children well. So I just wanted to add my voice of support to the Asheville City Association of Educators and the appointment of hopefully Libby Kiles, Pepe Acebo, and other worthy people. Thank you so much for your time and have a great evening.
Council, I'm circling back to Jonathan Wainscott. Jonathan, your line is open.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hey, today is March 9th, 2021. That means it's the 19th anniversary of the birth of Floyd McKissick Sr. right here in Asheville. He wasn't born Floyd McKissick Sr. until he was just Floyd McKissick until 1952 when he had his son. He was born and raised thoroughly in Asheville, raised by parents who instilled a strong work ethic and a value of education and community involvement. He was even a Boy Scout here in Asheville. When he finished all of the education that was available to him in Asheville at the time, 1939, he enrolled in Morehouse College in Atlanta, and he worked and studied as much as he could, as much as his finances would allow. And his pursuit of his education at Morehouse was interrupted by World War II. I don't know if he was enlisted or if he was drafted into the Army, but he rose to the rank of sergeant and fought in the European theater and stayed there until the end of World War II. He fought winning and against the Nazis and fascists. When he came home from the war, he came to Asheville before sort of getting his affairs in order and returning to Morehouse College, where he graduated. He then attended law school here in North Carolina, but he was not able to attend the University of North Carolina. He was rejected for his admission to that. The NAACP took up his cause, and it was litigated by Thurgood Marshall, and Floyd McKissick Sr. became the first Black student to attend the University of North Carolina Law School, right here from Asheville. He then went on to work with the NAACP and the Congress of Racial Equality. He fought for desegregation cases in Durham, and he fought for the right for Blacks to join the tobacco union and carry their seniority that they'd earned in the trades along with them. In 1948, he was working on the progressive campaign for Henry Wallace and came to Asheville to help the NAACP ask for permission for Paul Robeson to speak at the Asheville Auditorium, and the Asheville City Council denied that petition. Mr. McKissick then went on to become the second president of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and did a whole bunch of other amazing things. He came together with other Black civil rights activists in 1966 when James Meredith's march against fear from Memphis to Jackson, Mississippi was interrupted when James Meredith was shot. And Mr. McKissick was right there with Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael and Cleveland Sellers. So I would like for
Council, our next caller is Galen Wilcox from Richmond Hill.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear? Okay. Hi, my name is Galen Wilcox. I live on Hornot Circle in Richmond Hill. I guess I'm the first caller about the bluff development you'll get tonight. At the last city council meeting, several other Asheville citizens and I asked council to represent its citizens in seeking mitigation from some of the worst impacts from the gigantic bluffs proposed development. We were told then that Asheville could not join its citizens because the only matter up for discussion by the Woodfin Zoning Board was the height of the buildings. The next evening, the Woodfin Zoning Board demonstrated that Asheville City Council was wrong in its answer to us. In fact, the Woodfin Zoning Board decided to expand its inquiry into the bluffs development by adopting a provision in Woodfin Town Code that requires the zoning board to consider, quote, the health and safety of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of the proposed use, end quote. So the Woodfin Zoning Board stated that on April 5th, it will explicitly consider the health and safety of Asheville citizens living in the Richmond Hill neighborhood. So my first question to you is, does anybody on Asheville City Council feel any sense of duty at all to represent its citizens and taxpayers in this inquiry? Because I do. I think that the health and safety of its citizens is a primary duty for all good governments. Before Asheville's last city council meeting, I asked each one of you by phone and email for one single non-corrupt good government reason why the council would choose not to represent its citizens in this matter. The only answer I got back has now been shown to have been wrong. So now that you know that on April 5th, the Woodfin Zoning Board will overtly consider the health and safety of Asheville citizens, with this explicit choice before you, will Asheville City Council continue to turn its back on Richmond Hill, on the Richmond Hill neighborhood, and tell the town of Woodfin, here, you decide on the health and safety of Asheville citizens. Asheville wants no part of it. Woodfin didn't have to do the right thing. Amazingly, it did do the right thing. It chose to consider Asheville citizens. Why hasn't Asheville City Council? I exclude Councilwoman Roney from these comments. She has taken the time to inform herself about this business, so whatever she decides, at least it'll be based on knowledge. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Dewana Little. Your line is open.
Hi, I am back on to talk about this election versus hybrid process that was just voted on. I would like to ask and stress the importance of when the legislation being written or being considered or proposed to our legislators, that the consideration around the hybrid and the voices that have spoke in favor of the hybrids from community be a major push, not the election process. Because in that process, as I stated earlier, the health hazardness of marginalizing out the voices of Black community, as other people have already stressed, is a true danger to our initiatives around equity and inclusion. We can't say equity and inclusion and then uphold a process that could potentially marginalize out or limit the usefulness of the implementation of equity and inclusion. And so as that legislation is being written or drafted or however it goes to the legislator being proposed, that it's the consideration that the greater community, a greater number is in favor of the hybrid, not going into a full election process for all the seats of this board. Because the potentials there are just as dangerous as what we're dealing with this appointed structure that we're under right now. It's just as haphazard to the Black community. We're trying to fix the problem, not make it better. And that's not to say that this hybrid board is going to fix the problem completely. That's to say that it's an option for doing it a different way to see if it does work. And then we can have that level of accountability to equity, that all people of our school system are being represented, equitably represented in this process. And so I just caution around how it's being proposed, that the consideration is for the majority who are in favor of the hybrid versus the full election process of these appointments. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Robert McGee from Richmond Hill. Robert, your line is now open.
Hi, this is Robert McGee from Richmond Hill. Last week, I attended Woodfin's Zoom hearing regarding the conditional use permit the Bluffs developer seeks to build 1,400 apartments in the pristine forest adjoining Richmond Hill Park and sloping steeply toward the third oldest river in the world. I was struck by how often the Bluffs legal counsel stated that the traffic on Richmond Hill Drive is going to be what it's going to be, no matter the height of the buildings. This statement sounded reckless and antagonistic to me because the scale of the project has direct bearing on traffic. The developer knows very well that his current plan, without building a bridge first, will inflict harm on the Asheville residents of Richmond Hill. Such a cavalier view constitutes willful negligence, in my opinion. Sort of like a president who understands that people are dying during a pandemic, denies science and states it is what it is. By now, you all know that Richmond Hill is heavily traveled even without adding thousands of vehicles should the Bluffs be approved minus a bridge. You know that large trucks jackknife with regularity at Pearson Bridge Road and Richmond Hill Drive. There have been at least 4 this past week, and many of you have seen the photos. Visitors to our park, the WNC rest home, as well as crucial National Guard personnel and Richmond Hill residents rely on this access point to reach work, school, and medical appointments. Imagine our narrow lane jammed by extra cars at the same moment of a fire. It won't matter how much water is available at the Bluffs if firefighters can't access what many are now calling the death trap. What's more, studies show that excessive traffic leads to a variety of illnesses, including depression, strokes, and heart attacks. Allowing the Bluff to proceed without safeguarding health and public safety is not only playing with fire, it does not embrace the equity, sustainability impact lens that Councilwoman Roney has so wisely mentioned tonight. Please use the leverage of the city of Asheville and ensure that the developer builds his bridge before beginning the project. Once the bridge is built, access through Richmond Hill should be closed, except for emergencies. Please also ensure that the developer agrees to a stormwater management plan that protects the French Broad River water quality. That's the least we can do for this 300 million year old river we hold in trust for our grandchildren. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Autumn Pittman.
Hi, this is actually Ben Steer from Richmond Hill. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I apologize, Ben. We can hear you.
Yeah, no problem. I think Autumn's probably up next. So first of all, I want to begin by thanking members of the City Council for for listening and for answering emails from me and my neighbors. We really do appreciate your concerns and your attention to our concerns about the proposed bluffs at Riverbend development. So first of all, again, thank you for listening. Second, following up on what Galen and Robert have already said, I did want to ask City Council to seek standing at the April 5th Woodfin Planning and Zoning hearing and to help negotiate with the developer the following. First, a bridge. This really needs to be a condition for the project before it begins, and I'll address that a little more toward the end here. In agreement with the developer that once the bridge is built, that access through our neighborhood is closed except for emergency purposes. Please help us negotiate with the developer to address a stormwater management plan. It's clear that really hasn't been considered seriously and is going to be a big issue. And then finally, help us negotiate with the developer to agree to more buffering between the new development and the existing neighborhood. Third, and I think this will hopefully be the most interesting, I want to talk a little bit about the history and geography of this project. Over the last few weeks and nights and weekends, I've been, pulling historic USGS topographic maps going back as far as 1882 and looking at historic plat maps on file in the PAC library. In a lot of ways, what's most interesting about this property is a lack of development since the late 19th century. If this place was easy to develop, it would have happened already. This is land that was owned by the Pearson family. They were some of the earliest developers in Nashville. If this was a simple place to build houses, it would have happened already. It's not a simple place to build houses. The terrain is really steeply sloping. There's only a few landforms out there, frankly, where you can even start to begin construction roads. So when construction happens out there, it's going to move a lot of dirt. It's going to be complicated. It's going to require a lot of stabilization. And it's really clear just from our sort of neighborhood level discussions with the developer and at these early planning meetings that this hasn't all been thought out very clearly. It's really important, given how difficult it will be to build out there, that a bridge is part of that project to take pressure off of that existing property, that existing landscape, and that there's a clear planning case for stormwater. So we need a bridge, and we need the kind of proper environmental impact studies that bridge permitting would bring along. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. And again, we appreciate your help. Thanks.
Council, our next caller is Autumn. Autumn, your line is now open.
Good evening, City Council. We meet again. This evening's meeting comes just 1 week after the conditional use permit hearing with the Town of Woodfin Planning and Zoning Board related to the proposed bluff development. After 4 hours of cross-examinations and debate, prominent members of our community, including Ohm Sanctuary and Mountain True, were found to indeed have standing in this matter and the impact it will have on the Richmond Hill community and French Broad River. On August 28, 2020, the Citizen Times published an article where the mayor of Woodfin, as well as the Buncombe County Tourism Development Authority, both boasted the value that the Greenway, Blueway, and Wave projects will have for the area. These projects will directly link the town of Woodfin with Asheville via the Wilma Dykeman Riverway plan, a plan that has taken many years to bring to fruition. According to the article, there are an estimated 100,000 plus river users each year that travel through the River Arts District. The article also states that the public has expressed a desire for more trails, more river access, and more recreation spaces. I want to loop back to the earlier presentation made by the Economic Development Coalition for Asheville and Buncombe County, where he said that we are essentially laying the foundation for the future economy that we want to have in Asheville and the surrounding area. Asheville and the surrounding area has always been a place where people come to enjoy the natural beauty that is here. And as developers come in with their proposals, we must keep this in mind. Are their proposals in the best interest of our community and the natural resources that are such a significant part of our economy? As we grow, Asheville cannot exist in a vacuum and choose not to engage with our neighbors when the decisions being made so closely impact this community. Out of state and out of touch developers threaten the quality of life our residents
with their obscene proposals that would increase the number of dwellings by nearly 900%, concurrently increasing traffic in the same way. They threaten the quality of our natural resources by having no clear plan as to how they intend to mitigate stormwater runoff. And if the French Broad River is truly the bread and butter of our economy, we have to literally and figuratively build a bridge with the town of Woodfin in order to ensure that all the work and planning that has gone into creating these greenways and bluesways is not negated by poor planning and no cooperation. So we ask again that the city of Asheville join us in standing in an effort to mitigate the negative impact that this proposal will have on the community and the river. The hearing is April 5th. We hope to see you there. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Our next caller is Heather Hitalia.
Hi, this is Heather Hertala of Richmond Hill. Thank you, Mayor Manheimer and members of Asheville City Council. I ask you to consider my concerns, our concerns. Who pays the price when a wealthy Florida developer proposes to build a 1,500-unit luxury condo development next to a small working-class neighborhood? The residents of the neighborhood. The bluffs at River Bend will be in Woodfin. Woodfin will see the tax revenue. If a bridge is not built, then Asheville city streets will get its roads destroyed by the 5 years of heavy construction vehicles, and then at least 3,000 cars a day increased in the vehicles funneling out of the development onto Richmond Hill Drive. Richmond Hill Drive is a dead-end street, and the many roads and lanes that branch off are all dead-end streets. There is only one way in and out for the residents that currently live here. We as residents will say goodbye to our neighborhood way of life. There are no sidewalks, so walking the streets will become impossible due to traffic. Walking dogs or kids or biking will become impossible. The increase in noise and traffic from the development will have harmful effects on everybody that lives here. Richmond Hill Drive is a narrow, unmarked street with on-street parking that in many places narrows the road down further to a one-lane road. We are a quiet working-class neighborhood. We pay our taxes, and the city of Asheville should protect the residents and roads of this Asheville neighborhood from the development of bluffs at River Bend. Currently, the town of Woodfin has not required the developer, John Holdsworth, to build a bridge across the French Broad River before construction can begin. This bridge is crucial to Asheville residents like myself who live in the Richmond Hill neighborhood. A bridge would allow the construction vehicles and residential traffic created to funnel into Riverside Drive. An additional concern about increased traffic is the hairpin curve at the junction of Richmond Hill Drive and Pearson Bridge Road, where the traffic will funnel down to. This is already a very dangerous intersection. I've witnessed increased instances of tractor trailers getting hung up, unable to make the turn. Each time, police must be summoned, traffic must turn around and be rerouted, sometimes for up to an hour or more. It used to happen about once a month, but there was a hung up tractor trailer incident last week and the week before. Instances like this create havoc, and when it coincides with the end of a workday and all the employees from the Board of Education and other businesses get off work, it creates a mess. If the bridge is not built, the increase in traffic will create pandemonium when this happens. Asheville City Council needs to go into standing before the April 5th Woodfin Town meeting and demand construction of the bridge be a condition of this project going forward to protect both the Richmond Hill residents and the Asheville.
Council, our next caller is caller Kuhn.
This is Carl Kuhn. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, this is Carl Kuhn from Richmond Hill, and I got the same concerns that you just heard. We really want Asheville to have standing in Woodfin because of the damage that, to put it in economic terms, since the development would be in Woodfin, but all the traffic gets routed through Asheville, Woodfin gets all the revenues, Asheville gets all the costs.
when you add up all the costs, that's going to be pretty significant. And I emailed you all a map showing where problems will occur and already are occurring related to traffic. So you can check an email from me to documenting that the problems already exist. That's cost directly to the taxpayers of Asheville. There's also the indirect costs, which are harder to quantify. With an increase of traffic, if that bridge doesn't get built, kids can no longer ride their bikes on the street, neighbors can no longer walk, and we all sit longer in traffic. So there's all these indirect costs to the citizens of Asheville, particularly Richmond Hill. So considering the cost, we really want Asheville to have standing in the bluffs and require that the bridge be built so that Asheville does not suffer the cost while Woodfin gets the revenues. I might, if I have a second here, add another comment, and some ahead of me already made the point. That land, where it's situated and how it flows, would probably cost less, all things considered, to Buncombe County, Asheville, and Woodfin if that land were just simply purchased and turned into a park rather than allowed to be developed. The long-term cost would probably be lower of buying the land as opposed to allowing it to be developed. But in the short term, since it's in Woodfin, Asheville needs to have standing to prevent traffic from being routed through Richmond Hill into that development, both the construction traffic and the eventual residential traffic. And finally, I would like to thank Kim Roney for how responsive she has been to our concerns. That's all. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Megan Gardner.
Hi, my name is Megan Gardner. I live in Hornet Circle in Richmond Hill. And my husband and I, we bought our house 2 years ago. And our property adjoins the proposed bluff development. We have 3 children under the ages of 7 who play outside in all weather, riding their bikes to Richmond Hill Park, playing with the neighborhood children, and building forts in our backyard. I feel that our well-being, the well-being of my family, is being threatened by this proposed bluff development in more ways than not. 5 years of construction will limit my children's ability to feel safe riding their bikes and going to their friend's house down the street with the construction traffic. The noise of trees being cut down and the big machinery will not only disturb the peace and quiet, but my baby's nap time. So please, council members, I need your help to protect my rights as an Asheville citizen and send the Asheville City Attorney to represent my family and my neighbors on April 5th at the Woodfin Town Council meeting, which will be directly deciding whether this development will have effect on the health and well-being of the neighbors here in Richmond Hill. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate all of that you do. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Deborah Kelly from Richmond Hill. Deborah, your line is now open.
Thank you. This is Deborah Kelly. I live at 3 Skyland Court at the top of Richmond Hill on the curve. And like you heard from my neighbors last month, I have a story too of how I came to be here. I was an environmental educator focusing on wetlands and water quality in Louisiana. I escaped in the aftermath of Katrina, and I landed in Alexander for 7 years, living low, saving money for a home. And what I was looking for in a home was a high place, a place on a hill, a safe place. And yet I wanted to be near the river because I love wetlands and water. I needed lots of green space, forest, and I needed quiet because my nervous system is still rattled. I even track every vehicle coming up the hill and around the corner now. But I'm starting to feel like I escaped a hurricane in Louisiana only to be faced with a tsunami on the top of Richmond Hill. And that tsunami is not one of water, but it will be one of logging trucks and earth movers, bulldozers, and lumber trucks, followed by a tsunami of renters and their visitors, delivery trucks, ambulances, etc., replacing our hopes and dreams with a nightmare of traffic and destruction. I realize to the developer we are collateral damage, incidental casualties of the development. Councilwomen, we ask you yet again to stand with us, to view us not as collateral, but as real people. Stand with us, your citizens, by demanding that bridge construction must be a condition of this project and that the developer secure all the permits and approvals, build the bridge before constructing any of the rest of the development, and to close access to Richmond Hill Road except for emergency vehicles only, to provide additional buffering between the development and the Richmond Hill residents, and lastly, to agree to a stormwater management plan to protect the French Broad River. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Wesley Dix from West Asheville.
Hello, my name is Wesley Dix. I'm a resident of the Richmond Hill neighborhood. I'm a property owner. I have 3 children under the age of 7 who enjoy the neighborhood, the quiet streets, and I am asking tonight for city council members to represent us at the upcoming meeting for Woodfin Town Council on April 5th and assist us in demanding that a bridge is a necessary component of this proposed mega development in our backyard. As you've heard tonight from Galen, Robert, Ben, and others, this would have a direct negative impact upon the residents of Asheville, not Woodfin. Therefore, we need representation for the effects that are going to be happening. We, as you've heard, there are multiple reasons to support the residents of Asheville in this matter. Please take your time to review those and reach out with any questions. As I said, I'm an adjoining property owner to this proposed development and have young children and have serious concerns around the traffic, et cetera. And thank you greatly for your time and attention to this issue. That's it. Good night.
Council, our next caller is Shelley Standbeck from Richmond Hill. Shelley, your line is now open.
Thank you. So yes, I really appreciate all that I heard tonight from some of the other citizens speaking up about the bluffs, and I just wanted to say I agree with everything they're, stating. I was at that March 1st meeting, and I think I saw Sage Turner on there as well as Kim Rooney, and I think we were hoping to see more of you on there as well. We heard you weren't going to go in standing, and you proved to us that it's true that you didn't. And yes, please do. There's so many reasons. And I know you know that I'm one of these old timers who really believed in the city of Asheville, the city council, Riverlink, the promise of what wasn't at one time. It was industry and the fear of the pollution of these, industry buildings that were going down. And we spent all that time partnering with all of you, many of us did, to make what there is there today. And so, I'm very personally involved in so many ways. Own Sanctuary, is a byproduct of believing in that too. You know, it was about health and vitality. And so there's Zone Sanctuary sitting up there on 87 Richmond Hill Drive. And yes, the river's at risk. And so are the people up there. But the impact on all levels, we are looking to you. I know I am, to have you join us. And, you know, I pulled something and I thought I would just read it. This was the riverfront planning that took place in 1989. And it said, Asheville has reached a point in its history where the function and the character of the French Broad River must begin to respond to the needs of its residents in a cultural and recreational way, as well as an economic way. It is a resource of such spectacular grandeur that the city can only benefit from its careful redevelopment. The Riverfront Plan is a creation of many minds of citizens, professionals from the fields of architecture to city and regional planning. While the concept of his publications are primarily the efforts of a team of men and women invited to Asheville in April 1989, their work could only have been done with the active support and participation of a very large number of local citizens. I stand here today as one of those local citizens, and I really know that what you're standing in right now is built on many of those citizens, and it's a hard job that you've stepped into, but I ask you to please help stand for us and protect what was, you know, begun a long time ago, and walk along the river and see the product of what we help create.
Council, our next caller is Jake LaRue from Richmond Hill.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight, and thank you for your time and your service. I've heard so many things from my neighbors tonight. I'm also a resident of Richmond Hill. My wife and I own a home on Jet Court. We are one house off of the Richmond Hill Drive and will be directly impacted by any of the traffic from this development coming and going from our home. I also have my own story. I've heard a number of them from other members of my community, and I've heard a number of facts that I can't quite repeat from more eloquent members of the community, such as Galen Wilcox and Robert McGee, that really have this stuff down. But for myself, I moved to the Asheville area because of the Charles George VA. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran, and I came here to help get my head straight after my service time. And this quiet community of 146 homes has been instrumental to my own recovery. And I'm not happy about what's happening with the Bluffs community coming in. This project is going to completely change our lives, every one of us in this community. The traffic increase, the noise, the environmental impact, the quality of living impact. You know, I look at what's going to happen here as an act of aggression against the citizens of Richmond Hill, against the citizens of Asheville. And I see it being done by the developer, John Holdsworth, and by the town of Woodfin. And I'm asking you as elected representatives of the citizens of Asheville to please stand with us and take action against this. I fought for you. Fight for us. You've heard more eloquent people than myself speak on this, and I think that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service.
Council, our next caller is Dari Lane from Richmond Hill.
Hi, yes. Just like everybody else. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. The first thing I'd like to say, along with everyone else, is I do thank you for your attention to this matter. Obviously, there are a number of us that are very concerned about the development going on My name is Jerry Lane. I live on Richmond Hill. I implore you to act on our behalf. This is why we elected you. You are the people that we saw as representative of us and will fight for what people of Asheville need on our city council. This morning at 7:45, we had, and I don't know how much earlier than that it actually happened, but on my way to work, there was, again, a tractor trailer stuck at the bottom of Richmond Hill and Pearson Bridge Road. The only way around that was for me to turn around, go back up the hill, come all the way through the neighborhood down to where Emma is, and then come around underneath the highway to get on the highway to be able to make it to work in Woodfin. A trip that normally takes me 5, maybe 7-minute tops took me 15 to 20 minutes this morning, and I was 10 minutes late for work. I work for a local contractor or a local company that makes satellite dishes for the government as well as many other things. I need to be able to get to work on time. To have this kind of traffic as well as that many tractor trailers trying to make that curve to come up our street is damaging in so many different ways, not to mention all of the gigantic holes on the road that it causes. This happens multiple times a week. This is such, and it's such an important thing for all of us for various different reasons, not just the roads, but the waterways and the soil going into the water. And this whole project that you're doing about the Greenway is going to be affected. How can you work on something to beautify the area and not help us stand against somebody who is trying to harm that you're trying to create? I really would appreciate it if you would stand up for us and be there at the meeting on the 7th in Woodfin and represent your people and your constituents who need your help to stand up to this developer. I thank you so much for your time and for listening, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Council, our next and final caller is Libby Kyles.
Thanks again for allowing me to speak. The headlines after the November election stated that a historic all-woman city council to lead Asheville's government. It matters that there's an all-female council because it represents a glass ceiling that's being shattered. It matters not if the glass ceiling is broken, if this council continues to work with the status quo of backroom meetings and decisions being made based on now what is the good old girl network versus making decisions based on what is best for our communities, and in the case of the school board, what is best for our children. I'm asking that you all be the force that we were hoping for, and that you impress upon City Manager Deborah Campbell the need to get the Equity and Inclusion Office fully staffed. Ms. Archie has been gone now for 6 months, and we've yet to see a job announcement. The process for Reparations Commission should be community-led, not city-led. Black communities know what is needed in our different communities, and our communities should decide who represents us. Our children cannot afford to wait until this election process is approved. It is imperative that you, our representatives, City Council, center the needs of our children, teachers, and other school staff, and make appointment decisions that make sense for the health and the future of our district. You have the power to be the transformative council and put the needs of our students and our communities of color that have often gone voiceless first. Councilwoman Mosley spoke earlier about opening Pandora's box and the possibility of Asheville City Schools being absorbed into Buncombe County Schools. I feel like Pandora's box has been open for the past 3 school board appointments by the city. This conversation about absorbing Asheville into Buncombe County has been ongoing for years. This is not a new concept. It is imperative that we get to the point where we are doing what is best for all of our students. Spending $3 million on an ICS program that's abandoned after hiring a superintendent to lead our district who had not even been an assistant superintendent for a year is irresponsible. The many conflicts of interest that exist with our current board are astounding. And the fact that we are at a point where half the candidates, more than half the candidates for school board appointments are being ignored is irresponsible. It is your job to do what is best for our communities, all of our communities. And I implore that you think about what you're doing on March 23rd when you make those school board appointments. Thank you.
Council, that was our final caller.
Okay, thank you. Council, we do have a closed session tonight, but before we do that, I know that Councilwoman Roney would like to make a comment, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mayor, for making this time. I wanted to take a moment first to say that the first job that I had in Asheville was the morning coffee service at Richmond Hill Inn. And so that meant biking up those hills, it is called Richmond Hill, at very early hours in the morning. And I learned the lack of infrastructure as I continued to navigate that neighborhood, biking, walking, via bus. So here's what I've prepared for today. I have received, read, and responded to more than 400 emails from the Richmond Hill neighbors regarding the Bluffs development, and tuned into last week's almost 6-hour meeting of the Woodfin Planning and Zoning and Board of Adjustment on March 1st. So acknowledging the Bluffs development is outside of the city limits, I want to formally state my concern that the proposed height and therefore scope of the Bluffs development will have a significant and detrimental impact on adjoining city-owned property, including impact on the watershed of the French Broad River, our Richmond Hill Park facilities, and our already lacking multimodal infrastructure in the area, as well as impact on sustainability, affordability, and quality of life in the immediate and adjacent Emma neighborhoods. We need our residents to partner through support in defense of construction of affordable housing on transit corridors that can handle the volume of traffic, but this isn't it. So I know I'm just one council member, but I still think it's important to speak up that we need to seek legal standing to ensure the bridge is built before the next step of development can take place. It isn't enough for us to hope for the best regarding our city property and jurisdiction. We have a responsibility to our residents, taxpayers, and neighbors who rely on us for representation. And we have time before our next meeting and before the next meeting of the Woodfin Planning and Zoning. So thank you for your consideration and for the time to speak tonight.
Okay, Council, does anyone have any other comments, questions before we adjourn to a closed session? No, okay. All right, we are adjourned from this meeting, and you have a link to enter to, so exit out of this meeting and to enter into for the closed session. We will adjourn from the closed session. Okay.
Mayor, we need to make the motion.
I'm sorry. Yes, okay. Thanks.
Yes, I'm pulling it up now.
Oh, great.
So I move that the Asheville City Council go into closed session to prevent disclosure of information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to the laws of North Carolina or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes. The statutory authorization is contained in NC General Statute 143-318.11A1, the law that makes the information privileged and confidential in NC General Statute 143-318.10E, and 2, to establish or to instruct the city staff or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the city in negotiating the price or other material terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase, option, exchange, or lease. The statutory authorization is contained in NC General Statute 143-318.11A5, and 3, to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee. The statutory authorization is contained in NC General Statute 143-318.11A6.
I'll second.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. to adjourn to a closed session, and I will take a roll call vote, and I'm just going to do it by looking at you guys. So, Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
I think I got everyone. And myself, aye. All right, so we are adjourned to a closed session. See you there in just a moment.